I think we'll go ahead and start the meeting, and in order to start it, Scott, would you do the introduction, please?
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the commission. We'll go ahead and start with, I'm Scott Talbot. I'm the director of the Game and Fish Department. For those of you in the audience that I have not had the opportunity to meet, and we'll go ahead and start with Game and Fish Department staff over on our left. Sheridan, would you please start off?
Brian Esnick, I work in the Wildlife Division. Scott Hedrick, Second Deputy Chief in the Wildlife Division. I'm Chris Miller, I'm the Deputy Chief. Mark Chief of Fish.
Thank you very much. Lee, would you go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll introduce
James Zapp, the Fisheries Management Coordinator for the Fish Division. Bill Reddick, Wyoming Migration Initiative. Mike Stowe, American Fisheries Society.
Mike Kozowski, American Fisheries Society and Texas Parks and Wildlife.
Paul Day with Game and Fish. Jeff Hansen, Grand Chief of Montgomery County.
Rick Danner with the Western Landowners Alliance.
Lisa, would you care to just continue?
Lisa Robinson, Wyoming, and Jackie. Kristen Holmes also one.
Karen Rogers, Wyoming Fish Department. Carolyn Hageman, Wyoming from Arrowhead. Julian Terry,
I'm not proud of Rockwell, Wyoming Wildlife Federation.
Buzz Hedrick, Wyoming Backcountry Hunters and Anglers.
Sarah Locator Special. Jimmy Maya with Fishery Maya.
Randy Brick, Rocky Mountain Power.
Mark Cott, the Sioux Water County.
Ernie Thunder with Minnesota Jackson.
Kelly Lamar, Julia People with the one that
Catherine Warner, Park City.
Jim Young with the 400s of Wyoming.
Thank you, Jim. Pat, do you want to introduce your staff in the back, please?
Pat Lewis, IT Game and Fish.
Justin Perry, IT.
Robin Keppel, Game and Fish. Brooke Weaver, Game and Fish. Cindy Kellogg, Game and Fish.
Rick Huber, Game and Fish.
There you go, Mr. President. Go ahead.
We're going to give you a report.
You want to go ahead and do the
Okay, yes. Okay, in preparation for this meeting, there's a couple of things I'd like to bring to your attention. I call them housekeeping chores. One is, if you want to speak to an item on the agenda, and this is an item listed on the agenda, one of the items, please fill out a blue sheet. And Robin, she's gathering these up, and she has some. If you need to, get up and go out, and they're laying there on the table. You can fill one in there. This is the way that we'll take comment on the items. At the end of the session, we'll have a public call to the public when you can comment to any point that you would like, but not for all day. The other thing is your cell phone, other items that you might have, please silence your cell phone, put it on vibrate or something. Anything that might disrupt the meeting, we'd appreciate it very much. It makes things better for the meeting. Okay, with that said, I think we got it. Scott?
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the commission, and certainly welcome to our guests today. As far as the director's report, since our last meeting in November, there has been a lot going on with the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, and we have a very full agenda for your consideration today. I think along the lines of the top priorities that we and I have been working on are clearly moving forward with the delisting of the grizzly bear. We have certainly had numerous meetings with the governor's office and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to move that issue forward. We have made substantial progress as far as updating the recovery criteria and those necessary changes to the conservation strategy. As a matter of fact, myself and Chief Nesvik were in Denver yesterday, meeting with the regional director there, putting final touches on some of those documents. That has been a very collaborative process with the states of Montana and Idaho as well, and hopefully we will be seeing a delisting rule in the very, very near future. But Mr. President and members of the commission, I'd certainly ask you to recognize the incredible effort put forth by Brian Nesvik to make sure that that stays on task, and he has put many hours of work into that project, as well as myself and others. As far as legislative activities, we met with Tribal Recreation and Wildlife and also with Joint Appropriations Committee. If you will recall, Tribal Recreation and Wildlife was looking at several wildlife issues this session. Amongst them are the special management permit, stamps, antler hunting, and wildlife feeding. We anticipate that what bills will move forward on some of those subjects. In addition to that, we're now in the legislative season, if you will, and we have been responding to many fiscal notes on draft bills. Those bills remain confidential, but that has been a pretty significant workload on the department. And I would just mention that wildlife management issues, particularly issues pertaining to licensing, continue to be of very, very high interest with the Wyoming legislature. We visited with Joint Appropriations and presented to them our budget for the general fund. And recall, we have 5 programs in there: AIS, Vet Services, Sage Grouse Sensitive Species. And in addition to that, last year, the legislature directed the commission to request additional funds for employee health insurance and grizzly bears. And we presented that information to Joint Appropriations, and I believe that John Kennedy will share some of that budget information with you as well. But likewise, Deputy Director Kennedy and our fiscal folks have been working very diligently with all to put together those recommendations. As far as meetings that I have attended, I attended both the Fish Division and Wildlife Division Supervisors meeting in Lander and Thermopolis since our last meeting, and interacted with our regional supervisors at those meetings. I've met with the commission budget subcommittee along with Deputy Director Kennedy, and we'll be making some recommendations and discussions on that as well. I was able to spend an evening with our leadership development folks and speak with them and provide the opportunity to get to know them on a more individual basis, but also visit with them about some of the high points and low points of my career and some of the challenges that we have faced as an agency. And certainly that is time that is very enjoyable for me. We've met with staff and Cheyenne employees on several different issues through the time. And I've also met with several of you commissioners individually on different issues. One of the issues that we have been working on very diligently is WAFWA. As you are all aware, Wyoming is the host state for the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies. This year, we hosted the midwinter meeting in San Diego. I thought that meeting went very well. Certainly appreciate Commissioner Culver, Commissioner Little, and Commissioner Price for being there. In addition to that, we had part of our core leadership team for WAFWA, Sam Hockalter, Dee Dee Hawk, Tristana Bickford, and Renee McKay there to help with registration and various other aspects. And I would like to thank them for their diligence and work there and Those commissioners that were not able to attend, I'd certainly ask you to visit with those commissioners that were in attendance. I thought that was a very productive meeting, but please remember the summer meeting will be a substantial amount of effort on behalf of the commission and the department, and I feel very good where we're at right now in planning that meeting, and certainly appreciate the efforts of Cindy, Cindy Delaney, as we move forward with that as well. I was able to attend a variety of different functions from November. One of those is probably a highlight of that is the Outdoor Hall of Fame, and recall that the commission and the department worked together with the foundation to recognize individuals who have made outstanding contributions to the outdoors and wildlife in Wyoming. This year, former Commissioner Jerry Gallus, S.M. Leake, who was the founding father of the Elk Refuge in Jackson, Dr. George Frizen, who is probably the world's expert on archaeology and the outdoors in Wyoming, and also Dr. Oliver Scott, who was basically the founding member of Audubon in the state of Wyoming. All four of those individuals were nominated and inducted into the Outdoor Hall of Fame in Cody. And we will be approaching the commission during this coming year, and we would like to get to a point where we schedule the September commission meeting. We won't be able to do it for this year, but perhaps in the future we can make a commitment to have the September commission meeting in Cody and hold the Outdoor Hall of Fame in conjunction with the commission meeting, so that we can increase attendance there. In addition to that, we are reaching out to several organizations, groups, and agencies for additional nominations to the Outdoor Hall of Fame. This past year, a couple of those nominations came from individuals outside, and we're going to strongly encourage additional interaction with that event. I attended the Wyoming Governor's Business Alliance meeting in Cheyenne. I was also the keynote speaker for the Wildlife Society meeting in Lander, an opportunity to share my perspective on wildlife management and some of the issues that we as wildlife managers face. I attended the Wyoming Stock Growers Association meeting and participated in the Wildlife Committee meeting, as well as the annual award to recognize landowners for access. Please recall that is a commission-sponsored award. The commission works with Wyoming Department of Agriculture to recognize those landowners that provide outstanding levels of access for sportsmen in this state. I chaired the Pinedale Anticline meeting. I also chaired the winter meeting of the Animal Damage Management Board and attended the Interagency Grizzly Bear Committee in Missoula, Montana. I mentioned that myself and Chief Nesvik have had numerous meetings with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and that has been an ongoing process. I was able to meet with the Sweetwater Conservancy and visit with them about and the Wyoming Wildlife Natural Resources Trust and visit with them about issues on mitigation, and also attended a board meeting for the National Conservation Leadership Institute. A couple of fun things that I was able to do as I was able to attend the annual two-shot goose hunt, and I am very, very pleased to report to you that Commissioner Crank bagged the largest goose of the contest, weighing in at 12.35 pounds. So congratulations, Mr.
Thank you, Director Talbot.
In addition to that, we obviously have held many meetings on the Migration and Corridor Initiative, and certainly have tried to make that as cooperative and as transparent of process as possible. And I would like to recognize the efforts of both Deputy Director John Kennedy and Scott Smith for really stepping up and taking public input and discussing those issues with the many different interested publics on on that issue. In addition to that, members of the commission, we will be looking at developing a long-range education policy, conservation education plan, if you will. Commissioner Little has talked about Project Wild and other such educational efforts that we have, and we're going to plan to bring that to the commission during the July commission meeting. One other issue that we will be looking at bringing to the commission in July is currently we do not have in regulation a policy in the event that our computer system goes down during the last day of the application period, and recognize that we're right there getting close to that, and it will be our suggestion that if something happens and those systems go down, that we open that for an additional 24 hours. So we will be bringing that to you. Of course, the legislative session will be up on us, and we will keep the commissioners informed of bills that affect the commission and department as we move forward. In closing, Mr. President, over the holiday, I was able to take some time and participate in both pheasant management activities and elk management activities with my sons, and also spend some personal time with Commissioner Ryall and his family, and that was very much appreciated. So with that, I'd answer any questions that you may have, Mr. President.
Okay, commission? Is there any questions? Thank you,
Thank you.
Director Scott, Talbot, appreciate it. Okay. The next item on the agenda, I think we've got to do the minutes for the previous meeting, the September meeting. Commissioners, have you all read the minutes that Jerry's put out? Are there any questions or any comments? Okay, with that said, I'd entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Sherry, did a good job. Okay. Mark, would you like to come forward, please, and do your presentation?
President Price, Commission members, Director Talbot, it's my pleasure to be presenting to Paul Mavrakis his 20-year service award. And with that, Paul, you're supposed to hover over me. I was once as tall as Paul, but you know, my 38 years here, you just kind of get ground down a little bit. Well, maybe not. So, Paul, I remember the interviews back 20 years ago, and it was just an outstanding bunch of candidates that we had there, and you selected the fisheries biologist position in Casper. Much to my chagrin, being the supervisor in Green River, I was thinking, well, maybe he'd come to Green River. But you know, you did great work there. And the other two biologists that we selected at that time, we all know they're Rob Keith and Hilda Sexauer, and they are both supervisors in their respective regions. In Paul's case, he became supervisor in 2004, and that was a promotion to the Sheridan Region Fisheries Supervisor position. Whether as a biologist or a supervisor, Paul has done several things. He's demonstrated, I guess, several personal characteristics that have made him successful over his 20 years in my eyes. And these are just a few of them. But certainly what we know about you is there is no procrastination DNA in your genome. You move quickly, you move efficiently, you move thoroughly and completely. I think maybe there is a competitive DNA and genome that you want to be there first. But it has served you well. It has served us well. Over your time, both in Casper in Sheridan, you've clearly demonstrated the need to cultivate and maintain relationships with anglers, sportsmen, landowners, and agency people, and that has served us well in so many different regards. I think you take that long-term perspective where you build the relationships, and then the work and the progress comes from that. The other thing I know about Paul is he's a champion for all anglers. He and his crew have a great rapport with the anglers in the Sheridan region. And that would be the warm water fishermen, the people who fish for walleye and crappie, the folks who love to fish for tiger muskie at Healy Reservoir now. His use of tiger trout to increase the enthusiasm and the fishing opportunities in the region. And he embraces, in some ways, the North Tongue Special Regulation Area. He truly is, when I say all anglers, it's not just for the people who want to fly fish, the folks who want to worm dunk, it's all anglers. And he's known by the anglers in that regard. If there's a defining characteristic, I would say, Paul, at least in my eyes, it is your persistence. And that, again, has served us well. I find you to be an irresistible force, always finding ways to get things completed. Today or later this morning, we're going to receive an award. The Commission's about to receive an award on the Lake DeSmet project. That came from from a vision and then 11 years of work to bring it to fruition. I saw it for 6 years. The Commission saw it for 4.5 to 5 years. Paul lived it for 11 years, and he brought it home. I think that's just an example of that persistence. I guess Commissioner Culver would understand that recently the Newcastle fishing pond was another example of that persistence and his ability to work with many people to get these things done. Lastly, Paul, I greatly respect your ability to live a balanced life. You know, a hunter, fisherman, golfer, basketball player, devoted father and husband. You personify the balanced life that we ask our people to live. And that says a lot. Even though you didn't come to Green River and work with me, I've enjoyed my many associations with you across the time. And we look forward to more great works coming out of Sheridan Region and you, Paul Madrakis. 20 years. Oh no, we're just stair stepping. There we go. Thank you.
Mark's right. When you're working with walls, you better be ready to look for your footprints on your back. Okay, go ahead, Mark.
President Price, Commissioners, Director Talbot. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Ken Kurzowski, who is the President of the Fisheries Administration Section for the American Fisheries Society, the oldest fisheries society in the world. Ken is here to present the award for the outstanding sport fish restoration project. And this is regarding the Lake DeSmet project. With that, yeah.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Commission and Director Talbert, for this opportunity to come before you to present this award. As Mark said, the American Fisheries Society is not only the oldest, but the largest professional society dedicated to strengthening the fisheries profession, advancing fisheries science, and conserving fisheries resources. It was founded in 1870 and today currently has 8,000 members worldwide representing a wide array of fisheries interests. The mission of the AFS is to improve conservation and sustainability of fisheries resources and aquatic ecosystems by advancing fisheries and aquatic sciences and promoting the development of fisheries professionals. Over the years, my association with the American Fisheries Society, I've gotten to meet a number of your staff, current Chief Mark Fowden, Dirk Miller, and your previous Chief Mike Stone, and they have always represented your department with the utmost professionalism, and I would commend you for promoting staff that are so well respected around the country among the fisheries professionals. Coming from Texas, we certainly know what a precious resource water is. The Lake DeSmet project sustains an important reservoir trout fishery in northeast Wyoming. The reservoir supports an excellent cold water fishery where rainbow trout dominate the population, and it also consists of cutthroat trout, brown trout, lake trout, yellow perch, rock bass, and walleye. Approximately 36,000 anglers annually fish Lake DeSmet and catch about 60,000 trout. In June 2007, you may know a severe storm produced destructive waves that damaged one of the reservoir's dams. After the storm, the two counties that shared ownership of the reservoir approached Game and Fish about purchasing water rights to finance a $1.26 million loan for repairs. Purchase of the water rights could facilitate several of your agency's long-term goals for the Lake DeSmet, including protection of water-based recreation, including fishing and boating, protection of significant infrastructure investments, including boat ramps, comfort stations, and parking areas, and formalize and secure public access to the reservoir. A 99-year lease was finalized that specified 66,000 acre-feet of stored water would be left in the reservoir for recreational uses at a cost of $2.97 million, which worked out to 45 cents an acre foot. This will ensure that except for extreme dry periods, there will be enough water to launch boats and maintain the fisheries. Lease terms also ensure that the public will be able to access the reservoir to the high water mark for the term of the lease. An estimated appraisal of the value of the lease, estimated the value of the lease at $16.7 million, so the public receives a good return for the funds invested. These annual sport fish restoration outstanding projects awards are given by the Fisheries Administration section of the AFS to highlight the importance and the effectiveness of the sport fish restoration program and recognize excellence in the categories of fisheries management, research, and education among state agencies around the U.S. The sport fish restoration program, also known as Dingle-Johnson or Wallop-Roe after its primary congressional sponsors, obtained revenues through a federal excise tax collected on fishing tackle, boats, and motor fuels. Revenues are returned to the states to enhance fisheries and boating activities. This is a true user pay, user benefits program. The program was first created in 1950 and expanded in 1984. It has provided about $8 billion nationwide towards better fishing and boating. Wyoming sport fish restoration allocation for 2015 was $5.23 million. For the entire program period, allocations to your state totaled $130 million. The significance of this sport fish restoration program goes beyond what is apparent from just these monies. The sport fish restoration program was the genesis of modern fisheries management for states. For example, in my home state of Texas, the fisheries program was expanded to manage fish populations in the numerous reservoirs that were built in response to the almost decade-long drought of the 1950s. It was also used to implement a monitoring and management program in our coastal waters. These efforts established a foundation for modern fisheries management that continues today. More recently, we have used SFR funds to help replace a fish hatchery built in the 1930s and to work with landowners to improve watershed conditions in the Llano River, which supports populations of Guadalupe bass, an endemic black bass species that is a state fish in Texas. Your state has similarly used the DJSFR funding since the early 1950s. Virtually all activities conducted to managing diverse sport fisheries from lake trout, kokanee at Flaming Gorge Reservoir, and walleye crappie at Keyhole Reservoir. The Fisheries Administration section recognizes the critical importance of this program for state fisheries agencies, but also knows that the program is subject to periodic authorization by Congress and ongoing scrutiny by the users who pay the excise taxes. The annual awards program helps to identify and showcase outstanding fisheries projects from across the country and is hoped generate a greater appreciation and continued support for the sport fish restoration program. Thank you for this opportunity to come here, talk a little bit about the AFS, the Sport Fish Restoration Program, and present this award. Even though I've been in Texas for almost 30 years, originally from the Midwest, Wyoming sort of plays a part in my fisheries career. As a youngster growing up in the Midwest, fishing for bass and sunfish, I had an opportunity to come out to Wyoming during the summer and caught some cutthroat trout, and that just seemed, growing up catching from the Midwest, to be able to catch a cutthroat trout seemed like such a neat deal to me, and I kind of started me on the path of thinking, well, it'd be really neat to have a career in fisheries. So I always have fond memories of Wyoming. Went to school in Montana State and Bozeman, and got to visit your state a number of times. So I'm pleased to be here, and thank Mike Stone for hosting me on this trip. And right now, we'd like to recognize some of your staff. First, Sheridan Regional Fisheries Supervisor, Pat Rickus, that was just up here, whose vision and persistence throughout this project wouldn't have seeded. Also, Carrie Olson from the Lands Branch in the Service Division. Carrie led the exhaustive appraisal process using innovative techniques to determine the value of non-consumptive water lease, which was substantially more complex and larger than any past lease projects. And rumor has it Mark Fowden also played an important role in keeping this project going over the years. So with that, I'd like to present the board.
Who else did you want to talk? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mark, sure.
Mark?
And
I think I'd like all the commissioners, this thing has been quite a long, there's been a long time in building, and there's been a number of commissions that have held firm to really make this project go ahead. So, commissioners?
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
thank you.
Looking good now.
Okay, Mark, I guess, thank you for the presentation. Ken, thank you. The reason I ask all the commissioners to come up, that this thing has been a long time in the works. When I came on the commission, it was boiling at that time, and we finally brought it to fruition. And while all the commissioners here were not at that point meet, when we did vote on that, there were many commissioners that worked on it prior that were able to get this come. Thank you, Ken. I appreciate it. Okay. Scott, you ready? Your next item is the migration route.
President Price, Commissioners, Director Talbot. As Director Talbot summarized in his talk earlier, yes, we have continued to work on our ungulate migration corridor strategy. Mary Flandurka and her staff, along with Wildlife Administration and John Kennedy, continued working with the interested stakeholders since our last meeting in November. This morning, we have another draft proposal to bring to you, a four-part strategy that we feel addresses the concerns that we heard back in November, and still it still meets the objective of managing or evaluating and managing these important migration corridors throughout the state. I'll go through the four draft strategies. We call them in this presentation actions, so there'll be four actions we'll go through, and then a little follow-up on next steps as far as what the department plans to do with your permission as we move forward. So with that, I'll just jump right into this PowerPoint presentation. So as we talked back in November, new research, particularly the GPS technology, continues to reveal details about big game or ungulate migration corridors throughout the state. And as the state's wildlife management agency, it's important that we use this emerging science to both improve management decisions and conservation action. As outlined there, just to reiterate, this has been an ongoing process that we started last summer, reaching out to interested stakeholders, talking about what's the best path forward, no pun intended, to preserve and conserve these corridors. So again, this morning, we modified the November 15 proposal recommendations based on this input we've gotten. You've seen quite a bit of information directed in the forms of letters to you since we've last met, and we've looked through all of that information and come up with another draft strategy. So the first action we'd like to talk with you this morning is the update of the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission mitigation policy, particularly the inclusion of ungulate migration bottlenecks and ungulate stopover areas as defined as vital under the Commission's policy. And the reason this is important as we move forward, by putting this into policy and assigning these habitat features a vital designation, it enables us to make recommendations as we move forward based on this definition of no net loss of habitat function in these migration corridors. And I think that's the ultimate goal that we want to achieve. We want to make sure that these newly identified corridors, wherever they may be and for whatever species we may be talking about, that we can maintain that habitat function. And basically, when I say habitat function as in regards to a migration corridor, it's just the ability of animals to use that landscape, or that path across the landscape to go from winter to summer ranges and points in between. So when we talk about habitat function in reference to migration corridors, that's what we're talking about. So that's the first action that we'd like the Commission to consider. Again, reiterating, it would be to add the ungulate migration bottleneck and ungulate stopover areas to the mitigation policy. The next three action items, 2 through 4, are simply how we would go about basically the procedure we're going to use once a newly identified corridor is brought to our attention. What is the department going to do with that information? First, we'll designate the ungulate migration corridor as defined in our standardized definitions for seasonal wildlife ranges. And you should have that information, those procedures outlined in your notebook. But basically, to summarize, what am I talking about there? It starts at the field level. So the field managers take a look at the data that's been gathered through these radio telemetry studies. They look at that information, make sure they understand it, and it's accurately depicts animal movement across the landscape. And then through the review process, it's filtered through the chain of command up to the Wildlife Administration, where it ends at my desk. I give the final review and approval, and we adopt that as a new, quote, habitat feature on the landscape, and in this case, the ungulate migration corridor. So it's simply a process, an internal Game and Fish Department process that we use starting at the field level to review data that's been collected and analyzed, and move that up through the supervision chain to Wildlife Administration for final approval. And that goes on to our corporate database then as in this case, a ungulate migration corridor. Action 3 is kind of where rubber meets the road, so to speak. So under Action 3, we're committing to conducting risk assessments, looking at research needs, and also looking to craft, as we call it here, proactive management actions to maintain the permeability of these migration corridors. So the first step would be to conduct a risk assessment for each newly designated migration corridor. I feel strongly that our field personnel are the right folks to be looking at what risks they know or have been identified through others that they work with on a daily basis. What are those risks that exist on the landscape that could impede a migration corridor? We think this process is proactive and nimble enough that we can adjust on a case-by-case basis to the identified risks to craft management actions, conservation actions, to ensure that the migrating ungulates can continue to use these corridors. In addition to our field assessment, then, the department will work with the stakeholders that have been working with us all along in this process to review whatever existing information's out there, take input from them on what they view as risks, and what are also the existing protections and appropriate management actions to be initiated. Thirdly, they continue to participate with the Wyoming Migration Initiative. As you've seen, the university, through Matt Kaufman, has initiated the Wyoming Migration Initiative, and it's a very proactive and very successful program, and we will obviously continue to work cooperatively with the co-op department, co-op unit, as they move forward with also identifying migration corridors. So once we have identified risks within newly designated corridors, as you see here, obviously we're going to continue to cooperatively work with our stakeholders. If there's additional research that needs to be conducted within these corridors, we'll identify that. We'll look for funding to initiate those research projects, as well as any other proactive conservation actions that may be needed to take place, with the ultimate goal of maintaining the permeability of those corridors so ungulates can move between seasonal ranges. And then finally, one step that may have not been discussed in detail the first time we brought this to you is we also have to evaluate. When we do projects, we also need that final step of evaluation to make sure the money that we invested, the projects that we implemented on the ground, are successful in maintaining these corridors in viable manner. That would be the final action item under number 3. The fourth and final action that the department would propose to conduct under the ungulate migration corridors would be input on federal surface projects and planning efforts. So on a case-by-case basis, Mary Flanderka's shop, they continually receive proposals for work on federal lands. When it comes to migration corridors, we will use the work that we've already initiated when we're formulating those comments on a case-by-case basis on specific projects. So in most cases, we feel that we probably already have completed the necessary on-the-ground work that we can use then in formulating department comments when a federal project or planning effort comes upon us. There will be cases where the actions that we've taken to evaluate a case-by-case situation may not specifically pertain to a federal project. In that scenario, we'll make our comments as we always do, based on the best science available. The difference that we've stipulated here, that we'll work with stakeholders. Typically, we do a lot of commenting, and we may or may not reach out and gather a lot of different input. When it comes to the ungulate migration corridors and federal projects, we will consider all stakeholder input when we're developing these recommendations as listed under the 3rd bullet. So those are the 4 action items that we wanted to bring to you for your consideration this morning. As you've seen over the last few months or weeks and months even, we've gotten a lot of comments since the November commission meeting. And I just tried to quickly summarize all of it into a few bullets, realizing we have dozens and dozens of comment letters that we've received. And this slide here just is an attempt to summarize some of the main points, I think, that came to our attention. The suggestion to list specific recommendations the department would make when commenting or when conducting land use reviews, federal land use reviews. And we went away from that in this version, as you can see in front of you. We went away from the prescriptive approach. We're going to let our folks at the field level make those recommendations. This is simply laying out kind of the framework of how we're going to move forward when a newly identified migration corridor comes in. Another comment was corridors should be prioritized because not all corridors are created equal. And we feel like when we're successful in doing our case-by-case risk assessment, that we will have priority value assigned to that corridor. If we have a corridor, we do our risk assessment, and we don't define or identify any significant threats, that corridor would take a much lower priority than one that had multiple threats and one that we would have to devote some significant resources and manpower to address. So I think through our risk assessment approach, we will inherently prioritize these migration corridors. We heard about NSO, and that was part of a lot of the discussion back in November, the no surface occupancy recommendation. We received comments that we should apply NSO recommendation only in very narrowly defined circumstances. Other comments that we received were were almost opposite of that, and that we should be applying NSO whenever we have high use corridors identified. So the NSO recommendations that we received through our stakeholder input kind of ran the whole gamut there. Another one was provide a definition of interested stakeholders. What does that mean? We received several comments to this effect, and basically, I guess the easiest way to respond to that is our process. We intend to be inclusive and very transparent. I guess stakeholders can be anyone that's interested in the migration corridor. We're not limiting it to one group or another. So to define it would be anyone that has an overall interest in the big game migration corridor. Final one I have listed here is encourage risk assessments and the mitigation strategies be led by scientists and biologists. And I think that's exactly what we propose to do, starting with our field managers within their specific districts. We're asking them to be the ones to do the risk assessments. They know best what's going on in their backyard, so to speak, and that's where we'll initiate this process. So those are just some summaries of the dozens and upon dozens of comments that we received. I guess I did have another slide full of avoid recommending additional land use restrictions when stopover areas and for stopover areas and bottlenecks when they overlap with existing protections. For example, sage-grouse core designations. That came up frequently as well. Is why would the Game and Fish pile on restrictions when there's already existing stipulations in place? A very valid observation, and we would obviously we would look at that again starting at the field level. If we already have core sage grouse designation, the first evaluation our field folks will make is that adequate enough to maintain permeability in that corridor? There's also expressed concern with the reversal of the September 2015 strategy. Again, this centers around the recommendation of NSO for critical corridors. Instead, what we're saying here in this document is we haven't thrown NSO recommendations out the window. We're just saying we're going to do a case-by-case, site-specific risk assessment. And our local field managers are going to be able to be the best person for the department to make a decision on what's needed at that level. And then finally, the last comment here, urging Game and Fish to move expeditiously to complete corridor identification as well as stopover designation in key areas. Basically, this comment centered around there's lots of migration corridors that are suspected across the state, and we have just a very few, just a handful that we formally identified under this new protocol with using GPS data and a Brownian bridge statistical analysis. So obviously, as we move forward, and my next slide will kind of show you an example of what probably this is getting at here in just a minute. So those are the 4 action items as well as public comment that we received since the November commission meeting. So you've heard a lot, before and since that meeting about the Red Desert to Hoback migration corridor, the Pinedale Anacline migration to and from the mesa just south of Pinedale, and also the path of the pronghorn. And all of these are well publicized, well documented corridors. For example, the path of the pronghorn research was done by Hall Sawyer and Dr. Fred Lindsay, a former commissioner, back a decade or more ago. And just for an example, once that path was identified, we didn't even have all this formalized, the definitions and formalized protocol on how to move forward. But our field folks jumped into action as soon as those that main corridor there was identified. For example, our field folks worked with YDOT to construct a project for the highway overpasses, put in 2 overpasses along that corridor to aid in creating, maintaining that permeability of the bottleneck there at Trappers Point. Our field folks worked with landowners at the forest boundary between Bridger Teton National Forest and the Upper Green River. We worked with landowners to modify fences so that those pronghorn could literally move through the subdivision and continue their migration south. So these well-documented corridors have not gone unnoticed, and our field folks have actually initiated risk assessments and developed management actions even before we brought this to you just this past November. Ongoing and planned, and so let's just focus for a minute on mule deer. There's lots of talk about mule deer, and I just wanted to list mule deer with recognition that there's also research ongoing, pronghorn, elk, bighorn sheep, but all these projects that I'll show on this slide and the next are projects that may or may not have the primary objective of looking at migration corridors, but we will get the information we need out of these projects to ultimately identify what the corridors are for these mule deer within each of these herd units. Kevin Monteith is working on the Wyoming range and in South Rock Springs on two very large mule deer projects. Tomorrow you'll hear from his graduate student, Samantha Winnell, on the Wyoming range research. So there's two that are ongoing right now that have a GPS radio telemetry component of the project and will lead to migration corridor identification in the future. We have the Bags Mule Deer Project. Biologist Tony Mong, who's in the back row here, he's been working collaring mule deer in the Bags area for the last several years. At the end of his research project, we'll have information that we can use to identify new migration corridors within that project area. Dr. Matt Kaufman is initiating a large mule deer migration study along with other components along the, he's calling it the Eastern Greater Yellowstone Mule Deer Project. It encompasses multiple mule deer herd units from Cody all the way down to the south end of the Winds. So another very large project. Sheep Mountain Mule Deer Project. This is a proposal that's coming out of our Laramie region. They proposed to collar 60 mule deer in the Sheep Mountain herd unit, again, to look at identifying migration corridors along with the productivity of that herd for better management prescriptions. And then finally, as you were introduced to Dr. Hall Sawyer last November, he continues to work on the Choke Cherry and Atlantic Rim mule deer projects. So I just list these. These are just ongoing mule deer projects within the state. And once these are completed, we'll have the detailed information we need to, again, identify more newly designated ungulate, and in this case, mule deer migration. So where do we go from here? I just want to use the Platte Valley example since it's right next door. So this map here shows newly identified migration corridors for the Platte Valley mule deer herd. They're shown there in the dark gray. And if we use just this mule deer herd unit as an example, what are the next steps following this presentation today? So step one, obviously, is as I referred to in action item 2, we need to take that GPS data set. The field folks will go through that, identify migration corridors and stopover areas, and then forward those recommendations on up the chain to what ultimately ends here at the Wildlife Administration level for designation as a mule deer migration corridor. We've already taken steps in for this summer to hire a summer field technician that will assist our permanent habitat biologist to conduct the risk assessment for the Platte Valley mule deer. And we'll go through those steps as identified in action 3 that just presented to you. And I've committed that we'll come back to you in March and talk about how we're doing with moving some of these steps forward. So this is a continual process. We'll obviously continue to discuss and and plan on how we're going to address all of these various research projects and yield your conservation actions into the future. So with that, I open it up for any questions or comments from the commission.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Can you bring the lights back up?
Mr. President,
Just a minute. Pat Crank, Commissioner Crank, go ahead.
Scott, I just want to make sure I have this in perspective. So originally, the department, through a process, proposed amending our the commission's oil and gas mitigation policy. And that was what was presented to us in November, correct?
Correct.
And that oil and gas mitigation policy is used for the department to make recommendations to federal land managers when they are revising their federal land use policy or considering surface action that needs permitted by the federal authorities.
Yes, correct.
So we're talking about as the district in the BLM district in Sweetwater County is considering to amend their land use policy, we can comment on that.
Correct. Yeah, the management plan.
Or if there's a permit to drill being issued, sometimes we're notified of those and we're asked to comment on them, correct?
Correct.
So the policy would only be used when we have the ability to provide comments to federal land agencies, land management agencies. Correct? And so since November, you've met with anyone who would speak with you or had input and taken additional comments, correct?
Correct. Yes.
And you've come up with this new proposal for our consideration and potential adoption on what comments Game and Fish would make with regard to two federal land managing agencies as there is surface action that might affect Wyoming's wildlife.
Correct, and that identified in action 4. So it's one of the 4 actions, and that's correct.
Okay. And then if you could go to, well, and I guess just to put it in further perspective, has Game and Fish historically commented on land use plans and
Absolutely.
surface actions that might affect our wildlife?
Yes, it's a continual process.
Okay.
We're just adding this as a kind of another specific component.
Okay. And as I see this, really the only change to our policy will be to define those two terms.
Correct. Include those 2 terms. We have defined them in our seasonal range designations. What I'm asking today is the adoption of those 2 terms into the mitigation policy, and not only adopting them, but designating them as a vital habitat component.
Okay. And then the actions, well, action 2, you regularly do on a yearly basis in any event.
Correct. And then so action 2, 3, and 4 is just kind of the process that we're going to use, which, as you pointed out, we do some of it already, but we're going to be very transparent. We're going to reach out to stakeholders as we go through, identify risks, and then come up with conservation actions to address those risks. So
Okay.
there's not necessarily anything specific for 2, 3, and 4 that I would ask commission action on, but that is.
So 2, 3, and 4, you're really telling the commission and the public and all the interested stakeholders how Game and Fish is going to go about their work with regard to migration corridors and migration research.
Correct.
Okay. I have a specific question on 4. If you could pull that up.
It's that
One of your first slides where you talk about action 4.
That's action 4 there.
Okay. So I'm confused what bullet point 1 and bullet point 2 do. So on a case-by-case basis, comments on federal surface projects and land use planning efforts will focus on work completed under action 3 to conserve ungulate migration corridors. And then bullet 2 is if work completed under action 3 is not applicable to a specific project or planning effort, comments to consider corridors will be based on the best available science. And let me tell you my question. I think, I think our comments on any federal land use plan or federal surface action that could affect our wildlife should always be based on best available science. And I think bullet point 1 leads to best available science. And so why do we have 2? Why wouldn't we just say our comments on federal surface projects and land use planning efforts will be based on the best available science to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department?
President Price, Commissioner Crank, I guess what I was trying to get at there is, if applicable, we will use that site-specific information that we've already collected under our risk assessment when commenting on ungulate migration corridors. We're just, yeah.
Well, I would say, of course we would.
And that's
Wouldn't it
probably
be simpler
stating the
just to
obvious.
say our comments on federal surface projects and land use planning efforts will be based on best available science to the department?
As you pointed out, as we do now. And all I wanted to make the point is this risk assessment just won't sit on the shelf. Once we've had our field folks go to the effort of identifying if it's part of a federal project that we're asked to comment on. For example, if we've already identified the need to modify fences to improve the permeability of that corridor, that'll be part of the best science that we will present to the federal land bank.
And one more question. In my mind, risk assessments serve 2 purposes. One is to develop the best available science with regard to whether this is a migration corridor, where are there stopover areas, where would be a potential bottleneck, what are the risks out there to this migration corridor. The creation of 35-acre ranchettes, significant activity in oil and gas development, highways, fencing projects. I mean, so it's kind of twofold. Is it a corridor? And if so, what are the risks to that corridor? And so, that the department and other folks can then take action if necessary and if they want to, and if they can work out some kind of situation that, a conservation easement could be put on a ranch, assuming the landowner wants to put a conservation easement on their ranch to protect that migration corridor, or fencing projects across the migration corridor will be done in a wildlife friendly way with department funds and cooperation. And so is that the purpose of a risk assessment?
Exactly, and well said. And the Fremont Lake bottlenecks is another great real life example. When that bottleneck was identified, and it was brought to attention that right next to the bottleneck was private land for sale that was going to be offered up for potential subdivision. That enabled all the partners involved, commission included, to help fundraise to secure that property, so that and modify fences so that just as you said, the corridor was identified. There was a threat at that bottleneck, and conservation actions were taken.
Okay.
Thanks, Commissioner Craig. I think we'll move on here. I've got some loose lips for the public to comment. We're moving to that phase.
Mr. President,
Yes,
can I ask a question quickly?
go ahead, Commissioner.
Scott, when we compare this proposal to the one that you presented us in November, is it safe to say if we handle these on a case-by-case basis, the recommendations of the agency may be less restrictive, but they may well be more restrictive also? Am I correct?
That's correct. We're just not prescribing what exactly the recommendation is going to be.
Okay.
If X exists on the landscape will be wide. We're saying we're going to evaluate it on a case-by-case basis, starting with our field managers.
And when your field biologist makes their recommendation, his or her recommendation, that recommendation is then reviewed by the regional biologist?
Yes, the regional coordinator, their immediate supervisor.
And then does it come to you for approval, or what is the process?
Then those comments then are funneled to Mary Flanderka's work
Okay.
unit, and she collates them. And when she has specific questions, she will come and talk to
Okay, that,
here at wildlife administration level.
I just wanted clarification on what the process for review was. Thank you.
Mr. President? Yes.
What about corridors you don't know about? Like there's one, these bullet points that says we'll move expeditiously to document corridors. How are we gonna, where do you see that falling into this thing?
President Price, Commissioner Anselmi, I think that was part of the point of showing, just using mule deer as an example, what kind of research, going the wrong way here, what kind of research we have ongoing or planned right now. So we acknowledge, it's been referred to as our spaghetti string map. If you look at on our website, we have a state of Wyoming with a lot of strings.
Yes.
And those are suspected migration corridors. Those don't have all the detailed information that these types of projects are going to provide us. But when it says move expeditiously, we obviously will, as far as manpower, money, and time will allow us, we'll continue to move forward researching. And when I say research, basically it takes, capturing animals and fixing a GPS tracking collar, having that study run its course for multiple years so that we can define the movements seasonally from summer to fall to winter.
If I could continue. Yeah, you've got more than one species. You've got antelope, you've got moose, you've got, and of course the elk. So there's a lot of moving parts here, but then, so most of your information has come from the Wyoming Migration Initiative?
It's President Price, Commissioner Anselmi, it's a combination. Some of it has come from the co-op unit and their research projects, and the Wyoming Migration Initiative. Paul Sawyer and West Incorporated, they've done a lot of research. And then just like biologist Tony Mong and Corey Klass here in the audience, they're doing their own research within their own regions. So it's a combination.
So how are those funded? Like the one in
variety.
Bags, we're funding most of that, I guess.
Sure, President Price, Commissioner Anselmi, it's funded from a variety of sources. Private foundations, the Knobloch Foundation has been very engaged in the Red Desert to Hoback project. The Sheep Mountain project that you'll hear about here in the coming months, we're going to ask for Mule Deer Initiative funds to leverage with other partners to help fund these. So it's a variety. It's not one source. There's a variety of sources of funding that have to be accumulated to make these projects successful.
So have we thought about, are we putting enough money into this, or do we need to talk about putting money into this to kind of keep these things rolling? Or I guess we could all talk about that.
Commissioner Anselmi, one of the things I think, and Scott appreciate, the commission has put seed money into all of these. The initiatives have been started by commission money, and we support it, like the Fremont Lake bottleneck. We put some money, we put a seed money into that. It brought additional partnerships in there. They up in the Saratoga, the Platte Valley, we put seed money into that, and we're still putting seed money into it on an annual basis. And this brings in the contributors, the nonprofit type contributions, in-kind contributions from their annual. So this is a vast source of there, and we leverage the seed money that we have on that. So that's kind of how that works. I don't think there's any of these projects that we haven't put at least effort in at the very limit, a very minimum manpower from the, biologists in that area. And also we put, funds into. Are there any, I'd like to kind of get moving along
I'd like
here.
to talk about this a little more, if you excuse me.
Okay.
Go take that bottleneck. What was the price for that thing? Was like $4 million. Is that right? For that, buying that land up? 2 million. And we gave 250 plus a lot of manpower. And we, 250,000.
250,000.
And then a big bunch of that came from foundation to buy that land.
The conservation, President Price, Commissioner Anselmi, the conservation fund, what was the leader in that? And I guess I really don't know what sources they came up with to achieve that $2 million target.
Well, I see all these foundations. Is industry putting money into any of these studies, or is that part of the, I guess they could answer that later, but we got the No Block Foundation. I think they said they funded over 50% of that one in Pinedale. I don't know the exact number.
President Price, Commissioner Anselmi, quickly answer it, yes. Industry, for example, they've been major contributors to the Pinedale anticline that I mentioned there. They were major contributors to that one. Like you mentioned, the No Block Foundation has been a major contributor in the Red Desert to Hoback. So, again, a variety of sources. There's not one large pot that's funding all of this.
Okay.
Everybody's chipping in.
Has that answered your question?
Yes.
I would comment on the Pinedale anticline. I believe those people put like $35 million, the operators, in the POPO fund that is used for mitigation, various things. So industry has put a lot of money. The same with the Jonah. There is a large amount of money, don't remember exactly what, put in that by industry. And often industry will, when they go to do a project somewhere that's going to disturb the ground, they will put money forward to get the research done needed to make sure that the wildlife has protection. So yes, Terry, I guess.
President Price, Scott, real quick, bouncing off of Commissioner Culver's conversation where he asked about the steps to making approval decisions in terms of specific plans. The thing that concerned me a little bit as I read through that was, and I understand, putting your data together, getting your plan together, then it goes out to the region for consideration, adjustments, approval, those kind of things. But the thing that concerned me a little bit, and maybe it's just a matter of the wording, maybe it's not the intention, but it said, then after approval by the regional office, then we'll talk to stakeholders to communicate the changes and supply the supporting data. It didn't feel like they had any input. Felt like, okay, we've made our decision. The region has vetted it. Now we'll just tell them what we're going to do. That's how it felt to me when I read that. I don't feel that was your intention, but.
Yeah, and perhaps it's here under Action 3, President Price, Commissioner Little, where, as proposed, the risk assessment for each of these newly designated corridors will be done by our local field managers. They will identify risks that they might in those corridors. Then the next step, we work with the stakeholders. We take that information that they've gathered, we take that to the stakeholders, and we open the dialogue and say, here's what we see. We're thinking we need to modify this fence here. What's your input? What do you feel is appropriate?
See, that's how I felt you were really thinking about it. But let me tell you where I got it, because you might want to consider a little adjustment there. I got it under the process for designating seasonal wildlife ranges and updating range maps. That's where the wording was, and it simply said, Then they will talk to the stakeholders to communicate changes and supply supporting data. So it's as if it's just, here it is, we want to let you know what we're going to do, type thing. You understand my
Yeah, I understand.
point. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, Commission, let's open this up for the public comment, the blue slips, and I've just taken these kind of in the order they came in. The first comment, Mac Cott, would you come forward, please, and provide your comment?
My name is Mark Cott. I'm here on behalf of the Sweetwater County Board of County Commissioners. As Commissioner Anselmi knows very well, wildlife in these migration corridors are very important to Sweetwater County. The commissioners would like to thank the commission and the department for including principles that address our concerns. Those concerns are ensuring science-based information, reviewing and making decisions on a case-by-case basis, that especially as it applies to the application of NSOs, and also collaborating and including flexibility in the process that balances the concerns of all stakeholders. We appreciate the hard work of the commission and the department. Thank you.
Commissioners, any questions of Mark? Okay, Julia Stubb, would you come forward, please?
President Price, Commissioners, Director Talbot. I'm Julia Stubel with the Wyoming Outdoor Council. I'm here offering these comments on behalf of our members and on behalf of the Nature Conservancy Wyoming chapter, who also supports these comments. The Wyoming Outdoor Council supports the Wyoming Game and Fish Department's efforts to address big game migration corridors and develop sound, scientifically based migration definitions and management recommendations. We've appreciated the opportunity to work with the department during the development of the ungulate migration corridor strategy. This strategy will help the department meet the goal of thoughtfully managing Wyoming's big game herds. We have the science from the studies of the past decade that point to how vital migration corridors are, and we appreciate and support the classification of these corridors as vital. We agree with the department that federal land management recommendations to maintain and protect corridors, bottlenecks, and stopovers are imperative. This is an important action step in the current strategy. The recognition that corridors occur across landscapes with different management prescriptions and varying threats is evidence of the department's common sense approach for making recommendations to conserve these corridors. Designing management on a case-by-case basis, as the new strategy is designed to do, offers flexibility to pair management recommendations with the unique needs of each corridor. The current approach can be widely applied and tailored to each one. In addition, we appreciate the Commission's direction and the department's commitment to conservation measures like conservation easements, funding, and fence modification that will protect the corridors and benefit the big game herds using them. As you've seen, this strategy differs from the previous drafts that recommended protective management actions, including no surface occupancy stipulations for oil and gas. No surface occupancy would protect corridors while still allowing leasing and directional drilling to access a mineral resource. The research is clear that the best way to assure long-term persistence of big game migrations is to prohibit development inside the corridors. We expect that no surface occupancy stipulations will still be applied without hesitation. We will advocate during the case-by-case analysis and during land use planning processes for no surface occupancy stipulations when appropriate in order to achieve protections for these vital habitats. Other recommendations can and should be made that will influence the siting of other industrial development. Wildlife-friendly fencing or drop-down fencing recommendations inside corridors on public land will be important as well. The department's effort to pair migration corridor research with reasonable and targeted management recommendations is necessary and timely. This strategy reflects the department's integration of its own wildlife management expertise with years of big game research. Input from relevant stakeholders, coupled with scientifically based risk analyses, should result in case-by-case management recommendations that will, we expect, benefit our herds and Wyoming's heritage. We are grateful the department is fully committed to an inclusive and transparent process and an outcome that will be protective of Wyoming's world-class ungulate populations. Our big game herds are well served by the department's thoughtful conservation and management. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Julia, for a concise summary there. I appreciate it. Commissioners, any comments? Okay, thank you. Jeb Hansen, would you please come forward?
Mr. President, I feel that my concerns were addressed.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that. Appreciate you coming to make sure they were addressed. Randy Burke, would you please come forward?
Hello, my name is Randy Burke. I'm an environmental analyst for Rocky Mountain Power. Thank you, commissioners and the department, for the opportunity to speak regarding the January 2016 Big Game Migration Corridor Strategy document. Rocky Mountain Power, a subsidiary of Pacificor, serves electricity to more than 138,000 customers in Wyoming throughout the state, with the operation of tens of thousands of miles of power lines and a variety of generation facilities. We'd like to thank you and the Wyoming Game and Fish Department for including us as a stakeholder during the development of the strategy document. We support the department's current version of the strategy document that reviews the impacts of migrating big game and provides management recommendations on a case-by-case basis after the establishment of high-use migration corridors. Placing prescriptive no surface occupancy or conditional surface use restrictions without considering the specific components of each project could affect Rocky Mountain Power's ability to provide reliable power to its customers. Several of Rocky Mountain Power's high voltage power lines and multiple distribution power lines are traversed by the identified Red Desert to Boback high-use migration corridor. These lines have been in operation for more than 50 years and have not been shown to create a barrier to ungulate migration. Rocky Mountain Power supports the department's approach of developing management recommendations on a case-by-case basis because each project's impact on big game is unique and more research is needed to determine disturbance thresholds. Pacificor is committed to protecting Wyoming's wildlife and appreciates the opportunity to participate as a stakeholder during future risk assessments associated with big game migration corridors.
Okay, thank you, Randy. Any questions for Randy? Okay, thank you. Joy Bannon, would you come forward, please?
Good morning, Commission President, Commissioners, and Director Talbot. My name is Joy Bannon. I'm with Wyoming Wildlife Federation. Ungulate migration corridors are a value in Wyoming that we want to conserve. Recent technology and associated research has documented the critical role migration habitats play in maintaining the integrity of wild ungulate herds in Wyoming and in the West. We support the adoption of updated definitions for migration corridors and that stopover areas and bottlenecks be designated as vital. We encourage the use of all tools to conserve migration habitats, including no surface occupancy where appropriate. Wyoming Wildlife Federation has a history of basing management solutions on science. We're also known as being collaborative. We wish to be included as a stakeholder relative to the development of risk assessments, mitigation strategies and designs, as well as monitoring reviews. We are supportive of the department and the commission as they continue to aid the documentation of ungulate migrations. We look forward to working with the department and other stakeholders in conserving these important migration habitats, and we thank you for your leadership.
Okay, thank you, Joy. Commissioners, any questions for Joy? Okay, thank you. At this point, that's been all the comments that we've got on that. We're doing very well on time, and I appreciate the respect that everybody's shown. You want to make a couple of comments there. One of the things that this is a new thing that we're getting into. I think we need to go into it with our eyes wide open and carefully. And I believe that's what we're doing. I appreciate Scott and the department for putting this together. I know it is a major change from the original proposal. I think this will be workable over a period of time that we're going to have to address this. This is not going to be done in a few days, few weeks, even a few years, because we're going to find more of these routes and we're going to decide more of them need protection. At the same time, industry is going to be looking at some of these areas and wanting to develop them. And as we look at these are going to be a continuing requirement. And I believe this is what this proposal that Scott's presented to us will do. I've mentioned this one time before, but I'm right in the middle of the path of the pronghorn. I've supported the overpass. In addition, we had the commissioners take a look at that, and above the overpass for about a square mile, there's no hunting of antelope during the migration period as they get over that overpass. And there's no hunting below it for about a half a mile. So this is a case when it's not a blanket NSO on that, but it is a specific NSO that I think has been very beneficial to those antelope, because I've watched them over the years. They came in against that thing when they had to cross the highway. They were nervous. They'd swirl around and swirl. Finally, they'd cross the highway, and they'd cross it along stream. They had to cross one fence, the highway, and then another fence. Now I've seen antelope come in. After they've had that a couple of years, they'll lay down above the overpass for a little while, and then they'll cross. And it's not a panicky crossing. It's a rapid crossing. They don't like to stand up there. So this is a case we're kind of retroactively addressing, like the path of the pronghorn, and codifying that in a way in the management. That thing has been active now. I don't know. They found that here. I got there. Hall Sawyer and Fred Lindsay made a report on this. If I look at the date, September 2000. So we've known about that for a long time, and we've managed to work with it. With that said, commissioners, do you have any other comments?
Mr. President, I'm prepared to make a motion.
Could I suggest a possible change prior to you doing that, Commissioner Crane?
With all due respect, no.
Okay.
I'll make my motion, and if you
Okay.
want to change the motion, we can do it that way. I would move we approve action number 1, which is basically adding 2 definitions for ungulate migration bottlenecks and ungulate stopover areas to our oil and gas mitigation policy, as set forth in action 1 of Scott's presentation.
Do we have a second for that? Okay, hearing no second, we'll let that motion.
Can I get a clarification on the motion?
Sure. Yeah.
So you're not recommending the entire document, just the, is that right?
Well, I can, but what I understood Scott was asked, the only thing we're being asked to do is to amend our policy on oil and gas mitigation.
And that's what we're doing, is that correct? Is that what I understand? So
That's
all we
my
need is
motion.
action.
But if you want, I'm happy to.
No, I'm
The other
good.
ones don't, we're not amending any policy or rule or regulation. We can direct the department to take action 2 and action 3 and action 4, but I don't think that needs a formal action by the commission.
Okay, then I'll second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. It's on the floor for the commission. Carrie, you had a question?
No, he's got a motion and second, so I'm good. I had a recommended change, which I just tried to slip in.
2, 3, or 4.
You can amend the motion if you like, friendly amendment.
Well, all right, if you'd like to hear what, I wanted to have my fellow commissioners consider, this is down under department process for updating seasonal wildlife range maps using GPS, collar data and I'll let you get there. Five.
Page 5?
It is page 5 of the department process for designating seasonal wildlife ranges. Page 5 of the, I think, of the actual entire document, however.
Okay, got it.
No, I think it's the entire document.
Mr. President,
Okay.
I'd suggest that we can have that discussion after a vote and consideration and a discussion of the motion. That's not what my motion's even aimed at. My motion is aimed at the proposed amendment to the oil and gas mitigation policy that the department has presented to us this morning.
Other commissioners have questions on this?
Mr. President, may I comment, please?
Yes.
A year later, I'm still the freshman here, so my comments, I hope, are the intention is from the heart. But I would like to acknowledge how industry has come a long, long ways and more responsible than what they were 40 years ago. So for the record, we're not going to shut the lights out. We're not going to go back into the Stone Age. And we're not going to let wildlife decline. So for the record, I wanted to comment on that, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Keith?
I just wanted
Commissioner
to,
Culver?
Mr. President, I just want to clarify, what we're voting to approve is the department's ungulate migration corridor strategy.
No. We're voting to amend.
Action
If you
one.
look at action 1 of Scott's presentation, can you put that up, Scott? We're adding those 2 definitions as being vital under their mitigation policy. We have an oil and gas mitigation policy that's a written document. And so the recommendation from NGOs and industry and the department is that we add these 2 definitions to it and designate them as vital. And that's all my motion does.
Okay, we're saying the same thing. It's just the revised. Okay, we're saying the same.
Scott, am I confusing something or messing something up here?
President Price, Commissioner Crank, it's semantics, but the commission's mitigation policy is what we're requesting these 2 definitions be added to. We do have oil and gas management strategies that are not policy. So,
okay, I stand corrected then. But it's just the only thing we're amending in that mitigation policy is are adding these 2 definitions and saying those are vital areas.
Correct.
That's what I want my motion to be.
Okay.
Is that what
Have
your
you got-
second was?
That's what my second was. I'd call for the question.
Okay. Have you got that, Scott? You understand what the motion of this
President Price.
was? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, with that said, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Okay. Motion passes by majority. Carrie, nay.
Mr. President? Yes. Now I think it's entirely appropriate that the commission have discussion on actions 2, 3, or 4, or anything else you see, Carrie, in the kind of general write-up of how we go about this. So I think we can give direction to the department, how we would like to see them engage this process. I think that's our job. But, I just wanted to amend the mitigation policy because that's the action item that they requested. I think we can have all the discussion in the world about what you may see in other language or how we might change. Personally, I think action item 4 needs some change. But
Let's go ahead and Carrie, would you go ahead, please?
Oh, thank you very much, President Price and Commissioner Crank. Okay, what I'd like my fellow commissioners to consider, and this is on, let me just mention it again to make sure that everybody's where I'm at. So this is in reference to we're down where we're talking about department process for designating seasonal wildlife ranges. And then if you'll scroll to what is page 5 of I believe the entire document, actually only page 2 of that portion, and item 4. And it begins, once regional wildlife supervisor approval is obtained. I don't want to start until if you're there, Scott. I wanted, and Mary maybe.
See, it's back here in the other.
Okay, now I actually have a recommendation, but I wanted you to You're where I'm at?
Mhm.
Thank you. Okay, so what I'm talking about is if you go down here, my suggestion is to strike. So this is in the final sentence where it says, okay, once regional wildlife supervisor approval is obtained, local department personnel will make reasonable efforts to communicate with interested parties, landowners, permittees, like in parentheses, so that they are aware of the recommendations and the data behind them. So to me, like I mentioned earlier, it just felt like, you know, they get to be told they don't really have input. I know that wasn't your intention. And so what I'd like to consider is striking the words so that they are aware of, and putting in their place, present, just one word. So, and I will read you the full at the end. So present the recommendations and the data behind them for consideration and input before final submission. So that those stakeholders actually feel that they will be heard. It's as simple as that.
So they're actually are included.
They are included. I mean, perhaps, I mean, you know, it's still possible you won't make any changes to your recommendations, but I want people, the public in general, to feel like I want them to be heard. And I think the department does too.
Do you have that, Mary? Okay.
Mr. President? Yes. Sounds like that's what you intended anyway, Scott and Mary. Does that cause you any grief with your process that you envision going forward?
President Price, Commissioner Crank. No, it's just the difference in wording. If you look at under action 3 here, under the second bullet, work with stakeholders to review existing information. We can modify the wording in this document as suggested, and it maintains the intent of.
I appreciate that. Does anybody else have any objection?
Mr. President, I'd be in favor of that.
Okay. Do we need a motion to correct that? I think it's just a wording correction.
Well, I think an emotion, in my opinion, is appropriate just so that it's on the record.
Okay.
And so if I may, I will just repeat that on page 4, page 5, item 4, under department process for updating seasonal wildlife range maps, etc., that we strike the words so that they are aware of, replacing them with present the recommendations and the data for consideration and input before final submission.
I would second.
Moved and seconded. I'm going to ask Mary's writing there pretty fast. You've got it? Okay. Well, I know she wants it that down, and we'll get her that way. Commissioners, any other comments?
You want to pull that up? You've got this whole document on the machine, don't you?
Don't. It should be on your notebook.
It's on the notebook, but you don't have it on
I don't have this.
PowerPoint, huh?
I don't have it in my PowerPoint.
Would you like to see it, Mark? Because I've got it pulled up.
I've got it here.
Oh,
I've got it. I just wanted the audience to be able to see it.
I guess I'll take a step here. We've got a motion on the table. No comment.
Call for the question.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. Motion to pass unanimously. Okay, I guess,
Mr. President?
Mary, if you have any questions, just get together and you can go word for word. Okay? Okay. Commissioner Crank, yes.
Scott, could you pull up your action item 4? So here's, I'll explain why and then I'll make a motion, but it seems to me that I see why Scott and Mary are trying to do this. They want to say, we're going to use the good work we're going to do, but that doesn't make much sense to me. So I think action item 4 should read that I would just strike, well, here's the way it'll read. And I'm just starting at the top of action item 4. On a case-by-case basis, when commenting on federal surface projects and land use planning efforts, the department will recommend measures to conserve ungulate migration corridors based on the best science available to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. Because the risk assessments are going to lead to best available science. We're going to understand, hopefully, what are the risks, what is the migration corridor, what are the risks to that corridor. I think, as we'll see in a later action item, I'm going to try to address, one of the questions I heard from Hal Sawyer and Laramie was, we don't know yet exactly how much development can occur in and around a migration corridor and not affect the wildlife herd. So that's something I think the department and the migration initiative and everybody interested in this issue, the NGOs, should all be looking at. So as basically, I think action item 4 should just say that anytime we're commenting on a federal land management action, that it should be based on the best available science to the department. And we've broken this in 2 parts, to say we're going to use all this good work we're embarking on, but it just doesn't make much sense. So I think it's important for landowners and industry and NGOs and the department and the public to understand that when we comment on a federal land management action, we are going to use the best available science to us. And best available science is best available science. I understand it's subject to some debate whether a particular study is best available science, and that'll naturally occur in the comment process. But I just think let's be clear and concise what the department is going to do going forward.
President Price?
Yes.
Commissioner Crank,
Commissioner Perry?
clarification on yours a little bit. So if you wanted that sentence to end that way, are you removing this? Is that how you intend for the paragraph to end?
We need to remove the next sentence that says if work completed under action 3. I think the last sentence is important. The department will consider input from stakeholders during development of recommendations.
Okay.
So.
So, Mr. President, so we're eliminating the number 2 bullet there. And,
Scott,
and just
pull up the actual action, the document before that where you list action 4, where you're not breaking it into bullets. Like the first page of your presentation.
I don't have,
He doesn't.
President Price, Commissioner Crank,
I don't have what I have.
I don't have, you have it in your notebook, the
Go.
1-page strategy, but it's not here on the
Let me
PowerPoint.
just scratch it out there. Let me do this real
Commissioner
quick.
Crank, I did capture your changes.
write it out for me.
He's from Lander.
From Rollins, actually. That's the sad part.
I couldn't say that because my wife is from.
Yeah, I know.
They're working on it. They're just trying to get there.
We can.
President
we have-
Price, Commissioners,
Yes.
the public does have the packet that has this definition in it, so they're able to follow along
Okay.
with these edits.
Okay, you got Commissioner Crank, if you got the thing organized.
Yeah, I could read it for the record.
Just Richard's review.
Got it.
Okay,
Do you want me to read it?
Yes.
yeah. I think
Okay.
you ought to read it. Have you got a motion on the table at this time?
I'll make one once I read it.
Okay.
I would move that we amend action item 4 in the information presented to the public and presented by Scott in this meeting to read as follows. On a case-by-case basis, when commenting on federal surface projects and land use planning efforts, the department will recommend measures to conserve ungulate migration corridors based on, then I'm going to strike the rest of that sentence and the next sentence, and I'm going to add the language, the best science available to the Wyoming Game and Fish Department. And then the last sentence in action item 4 will remain. The department will consider input from stakeholders during development and development of recommendations.
And I would second that.
He hasn't made the motion.
I moved. That's my motion.
Okay, you moved. You second it. Okay, commissioners?
Mr. President,
Yes.
I would ask a point of order, I guess. I don't know if any members of the public that have spoke to us before off of the blue sheet, I don't know if any of them are ready to spring out of their seat and address this change. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, but I would be curious to know if we have upset the apple cart of anybody that's here regarding this document. Maybe not. I don't know.
We have a motion on the floor, and this is for commission discussion
Okay, that's fine.
on that.
I'll call for the
Let's
question.
Go ahead and move the motion, and then we can open it to the public. But right now, it's within the commission's control.
Okay.
Okay? Is that, do I understand that, Rob?
Yeah, I'm just opening it to public comments. If there's any public comment.
Okay. I will open it to public comment. Okay? You come ahead, please.
President Price, would you like?
Joe, come on up to the podium. Come up to the podium so everybody can hear you. I should lean toward the mic so everybody can hear me.
Richard? Richard,
Thank you.
you want the actual language?
Thank you, Commissioner Crank. I do have it right here. Thanks. Members of the commission, my name is Richard Garrett. I'm External Affairs Director with the Nature Conservancy. We were one of several groups and industry stakeholders and agricultural interests that participated over the course of the last 60 days at the direction of the commission in helping the department to craft these 4 action steps. I'm not standing here in opposition or support of amending action step 4, but I will say that in terms of an apple cart, I don't think that everybody that was at those meetings is aware that this will be changed, and in fairness, perhaps they should be. So that would be my observation.
Okay. What you're saying is that this motion that Commissioner Crank has put onto this is a change that should be reviewed by the people of the public. Is that correct?
Mr. President, that would be my point of view. This is an amendment that I think is offered in good faith and is probably constructive, but at the same time, a lot of folks did a lot of hard work, and in fairness to those folks, perhaps this could be something that could be further discussed and brought to the commission at its next meeting. I don't know if that's practical from the standpoint of your schedule, but
At this point, I understand what you're saying. The commission, I'm going to say my opinion is the amendment is actually more friendly for the input to it. Do I understand that correctly?
Mr. President, speaking on behalf of the Nature Conservancy, I would agree with that.
Okay. So with that said, I think that we are in, we can't send these out. And every comment of things, as we try to improve it or make some changes or receive comments here, there's, or we've had comments come in on the internet. We can't just go out for after every one of them. But this to me, the comment and the proposal that Commissioner Crank has made is actually an improvement in addition to it. Do you agree with that?
Yes, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
With that said, Commissioner Crank?
No, I really commend the stakeholders for working so hard on this since November. But, you know, every stakeholder knew that ultimately whatever you came up with was going to come to the commission. That's why we urge you to do that. And the commissioners weren't involved in that process. So if it comes to, I absolutely support the public comment process and vetting things with the public and government agencies and NGOs before we take action. But it becomes unworkable, Richard, if we do what you suggest, that every time a proposal comes in front of the commission and we change something, that it has to go back to that process. I mean, we just can't do that. So I appreciate your comments, but I think that the amendment is friendly. I think it clarifies what might lead to confusion in the future. That was my intent in making it. And so I would urge that we go forward with this, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Crank. I would comment, I believe all the commissioners, at least some of the commissioners, have received comments or requests to work on those working groups. I did, and I said I will not. And I know of one other commissioner that has received a request. So we've not actually actively participated in those working groups deliberately on that point, because we're the ones that have to finally come down. With that said, I would like to go ahead and call for the question, I guess.
Call for the question.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion passes unanimously. And thank you for your comments. There's been some additions, stuff. With that said, I think we'll move on to this. I think we're going to move on to a break. Sounds good. Okay. Thank you. Let's go ahead and keep moving along. Appreciate it. Kind of get set down. We can move along our agenda. We took a little longer break, but we're doing good. Jean?
Okay.
You're
Mr.
on.
President, members of the commission, and Director Talbot, I have commission agenda item number 5, which is the appointment of licensed selling agents. And you have in your packet 8 applicants from this past commission meeting from businesses requesting to become licensed vendors for the Game and Fish Department. We have 4 applicants that are new, requesting to be authorized agents, and we have 4 transfer of owner applications. I'd like to just summarize those applicants for you for commission action. The first new applicant is Ace Hardware in Laramie. They applied as a non-sporting goods store in Commissioner Anselmi's district. This particular business is located really close to the university, a central location. And the game warden felt that they had a lot of really good foot traffic in that particular business. And with Kmart, who was closely located to that business, they did not renew their bond. So the feeling was that this Ace Hardware would replace that need of the Kmart that's no longer a business for central Laramie. There are 6 other agents in Laramie, 5 full and 1 fish only. And the other new applicant is Rocky's Quick Stop, located in Baggs, Wyoming. And that's in Commissioner Anselmi's district as well. The game warden felt that they would accept this application and advertise in Baggs. And I did have a conversation with Commissioner Anselmi about that prior to that action. And based on this other business offering extended hours in the evening, we felt that it was an appropriate opportunity to have another agent, to have 2 agents in Baggs offering a little more customer service. The third applicant is Heinz General Store, located in Fort Washakie, Commissioner Cloud's district, also applied as a non-sporting goods. We do not have any agents in that particular town, and it's located right on the highway. The closest agent is in Lander, 13 miles away, or also on the reservation is the Crowheart store, 30 miles away. So again, we advertised and went ahead and accepted that application. And Paint Valley Ranch Supply, located in DuBois in Commissioner Cloud's district. This particular business applied as a sporting goods store, And so the local game warden, Brian Baker, did a visit to that business, and he did say they qualify as a sporting goods store since they have a dedicated section within their business offering sporting goods and equipment. And they also have applied for a firearms license. So they do qualify as a sporting goods vendor. In the town of DuBois, we have 6 other agents, 5 full and 1 fish only. So those are the new applicants that would be brand new agents that don't currently exist in those towns. We had 4 requests to transfer ownerships for people that have acquired ownership over existing licensed vendors. 2 of those in Commissioner Crank's district. The Wheatland Travel Plaza and Johnston's Corner were both acquired by a business known as the Fast Stop. And so those 2 locations would be changing their names to the Fast Stop. Still located in the town of Wheatland, where Wheatland Travel Plaza was, and in Guernsey, where Johnston's Corner was. And those have all received their proper approval from the local game warden, the regional supervisor, and also Commissioner Crank. And both of those locations have been long-standing agents for quite a long time, and they have a very good sales, and they're both 24-hour locations. The other transfer of ownership is the Fly Shop of the Bighorns in Commissioner Little's district, and that business was also acquired from a new owner, and they'll be changing their name to the Big Bug. And again, we have all the proper approvals from Commissioner and Warden and Supervisor. And again, they've been an agent since 1995, so long-standing business in the town of Sheridan. And there's 5 other full agents in the town of Sheridan. And this particular business sells over 1,000 licenses for $17,000. So it's pretty obviously a good business and want to continue that location. The final one received was from in Jackson in Commissioner Price's district, which is the Stone Drug. They've been a business since 1989, and they have sold to a new owner. And Commissioner Price has approved that application. The information is not in your packet, but he has approved that location. And this particular business, they sell over 4,000 licenses for $93,000. So right in the town of Jackson, a really prominent location for license sales. There is a number of agents in Jackson. We have 11 vendors in the town of Jackson, and a lot of those have a mailing address, but they're located in the perimeter of towns or out, remotely, and they just have a mailing address of Jackson. So with that, I would ask the commission to approve the 4 new applicants and also to approve the 4 transfer of ownerships. I would be happy to answer any questions if you have any regarding these applicants.
Okay, thank you, Jean. Commissioners, questions for Jean?
President Price,
Yes, Commissioner Little.
a little concern on, and I think this is the correct one, on Painted Valley Ranch Supply.
Yes.
In DuBois. You mentioned there are already 5 other licensed selling agents in DuBois?
Commissioner Price and Commissioner Little, that is correct. Currently, we have 6 other agents in the town of DuBois. We have a Napa hardware company, DuBois Superfoods, Wind River Gear, Brooks Lake Lodge, Marlowe's Fly Shop, and High Altitude Tees and Tackle. And through state statute, if a business applies to the commission and they apply as a sporting goods vendor, then through our regulations, we're required to accept that application. And then the game warden has to make a visit to the business. And the game warden, based on regulations, he has to determine, or she, based on visual observation, is there 50% or more of hunting, fishing, camping, outdoor types equipment available for sale in that business. And based on that observation, then they say, yes, they qualify, or no, they do not qualify. And this particular game warden has indicated they would qualify as a sporting goods vendor. So therefore, we are really required by state statute to appoint them unless there's an issue with the evaluation from the game warden.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that explanation.
Okay. Other commissioners, questions?
I would so move.
It's been moved by Commissioner Crank,
I second the move.
seconded by Commissioner Rail. Commissioners, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Hearing none, motion passes unanimously. Jean, thank you for a good, concise explanation. You're always well prepared, and you can answer Carrie's question anytime right quick.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Item number 6. Rennie? Okay. Is Rennie around? Rennie, you're on.
Thank you, President. This is an annual exercise that we bring you this list of eligible projects for volunteers each year, and that's due to largely state statute. The Wyoming Workers' Compensation Act specifically mentions projects that are approved by the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission for volunteers are covered by the Wyoming Workers' Compensation Act. So this year, to give you a little bit of an overview of what we're presenting to you is a list of projects that are eligible, kind of categories, and that works for that coverage. So that's what we have for you here today is kind of that list of projects that we think do a pretty good job of covering everything that volunteers engage in. 2015 was a good year. Volunteers, we had reported hours of over 8,000 hours by volunteers. Most of that is hunter education. And so we really appreciate the volunteers that help out on projects and help carry out another part of state law, and that is the hunter education program. Our hunter education program coordinator, Tristana Bickford, is here as well, and she's also been running the volunteer coordination for Game and Fish here for a few years. So if you have any specific questions, Tristana could help out. But it's just very impressive the amount of volunteer hours we get in any given year. So for proposed projects related to hunter education, hunter information and education, this also gets into some of the recruitment programs. These are what we propose to you. Also, the second largest category of projects that volunteers work are related to fish. And so I believe we had it's 1,500 hours went to fish projects. So here are some of those fish and wildlife habitat, population research, management, monitoring, surveys, that kind of work that volunteers help out with. Also have a series of habitat projects. Volunteers do have some fun when they're out there helping sometimes as well. We get some projects too on the commission-owned lands at feed grounds. So again, it's just there's a gamut of work that volunteers can help out with. Commissioners even get out there as well, as you can see here on your right. President Price was out there helping out on the Wyoming range this year. So a lot of great things out there. We sure appreciate it, and I think that goes from the field level all the way up here to the top. We get into a few other categories, and we do have a more umbrella term there that if there's anything that the director's office believes requires volunteer participation to achieve goals, then we'd have that as well. But this all is very important to qualify these volunteers for workers' compensation. And so with that, if proposed to the commission, President Price, to approve these lists of proposed projects.
Okay. Commissioners, any questions for Rennie? Okay, hearing none, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll move that we accept the proposal regarding volunteer projects.
Second?
Second that.
Been moved and seconded. All in favor? Well, any discussion among the commission? All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Say nay. There's no nays. Motion passed unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Rennie. I appreciate it.
Thank you, President. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay. Gene Pauley, Rennie's had his 5 minutes of glory. So Gene, would you? Glenn, not Gene, Glenn.
President Price and members of the commission, in November of 2015, the department provided a presentation to the commission about Wyoming State Wildlife Action Plan. This is a plan designed to maintain the health and diversity of wildlife within Wyoming, including preventing the need for future listings under the Endangered Species Act. The department is currently in the process of revising its state wildlife action plan with a target completion date of January of 2017. As part of the presentation, the commission was presented with a list of species of greatest conservation need. The department uses the species of greatest conservation need designation as a way of prioritizing species for future funding and research. The number of species of greatest conservation need identified on the list presented to you does not affect the funding the department receives from the federal government to implement this plan. Rather, this money is allocated to the states based on their population and geographic size. In November, when the list was presented to the commission, the decision was made to table approving the list until a later date to allow the commission more time to review it. I will now turn this presentation over to Wildlife Deputy Director Scott Smith, who will answer any questions that you have about the list, as well as talk about changes that have occurred to the list since it was last presented.
Scott, you're on the hot seat again.
President Price, Commissioners, you have the list in your notebook. Deputy Kennedy is going to pass out a hard copy just so you can make notes. As Glenn said, there's a few changes since the November meeting. I also emailed you a memo that contained more information that some of you asked for, specifically Commissioner Culver and Commissioner Crank on various species. And I don't know if everyone still has that memo, but in that memo, there was 11 species that our folks provided a little more detail on how they came about with the ranking. And real quick, if I could, I'll just summarize those. Basically, in most every case, we need more information to assess population trends, species densities, or more accurately identify habitat risks. So in most of these cases, that's why it's particularly the bird species were ranked as they were. So for example, the Clark's nutcracker, the department needs to keep an eye on this one because of extensive conifer mortality. So with the habitat changing for that species and in large acreages of dead and dying conifer, what does that mean for a Clark's nutcracker within the state? And as Glenn pointed out, I guess I digress here a minute. A SGCN classification does not indicate that these species are of federal concern. These are species are of state concern that we want to make sure we gather enough information so that they not become federally listed. And so, and also as Glenn pointed out, by including these on the list, they then become available or eligible, I should say, for grant monies through the federal government. They're called state wildlife grants. That if we identify these as priority species, then we can apply that grant money to collect more information for that specific species. For example, the Clark's nutcracker. So as we go through this list, then golden eagles, red crossbills, American kestrel, canyon wrens, common nighthawk. As you see through there, the common yellowthroat. Again, some of them simply need more information so that we can assess population status within the state. To summarize why a lot of those species got listed, that's it. We need more information to make an informed decision and recommendation. They also had white-tailed prairie dog, black-tailed prairie dogs, and Preble's jumping mouse, excuse me. And those details are provided in this memo as well. So at this point, I guess I'd open up for any questions on those 11 species before I move on to a few additional species that were removed from the list since the last time we visited.
Okay, Commissioner Little?
President Price, Scott, just some knowledge, just to gain a little knowledge. So on this breeding bird survey,
Mhm.
who conducts that? Where does that information come from?
President Price, Commissioner Little. The Breeding Bird Survey is a federally run program, but it relies on volunteers. So we have department employees that actually do it. If they have the expertise in bird calls, a breeding bird survey relies on you being able to identify the species through their song. So it takes some competency. I tried it for many years and was pretty poor at it, but
Yeah, I'm sure I would be too.
so it's a volunteer program basically. Is that fair to say?
Okay, so when we're talking about the breeding bird survey data, is that very specifically data in Wyoming, or is that federal data in general?
So President Price, Commissioner Little, yes, it's very specific to Wyoming. So you drive a designated route, so they'll assign you a route, and then you're responsible to drive that route, stop every half mile, I believe it is, and listen for 3 minutes, and then continue on and on and on. So you collect the data, we turn it in to whatever federal oversight committee that is, and then they compile all the numbers and send it back. And Andrea Orobono, our non-game biologist, actually is the keeper of the data then for Wyoming. So it comes back to the state for our use, and that's how we can assess population trends, status up or down. So when that information's lacking, that again is a missing piece of the puzzle for us to be able to assess population trends over time.
So I guess where I'm going with this, and I really appreciate your explanation because I didn't have a clue, but I read all of these, which I did definitely appreciate the additional information. And on a whole bunch of them, you had that was basically insufficient, or it was indicating a decline, and you needed more data. And now with the explanation that I've received from you, I mean, I get it. Wow. I mean, and you got to really want to love birds or whatever to want that job. But anyway, then you would go on to say Wyoming may need to boost the number of survey grids in the integrated monitoring in bird conservation regions data. And so if the way I understand all of this is basically you guys are putting these on a tier 2 so that you can qualify for these federal funds in order to do a better study. I'm not sure how survey grids are done either, and you might, if that isn't a huge explanation, just from my own knowledge, provide that. But I mean, you got people stopping every 3 minutes. I mean, I don't know, a little shaky on the data there, and maybe you guys are too. And so you're trying to do something that really shows. I mean, because I look at Golden Eagle and I go, oh my God. I mean, everywhere I drive in the state, there's 6 or 7 in a row sitting on fence posts. And I realize that you're considering wind farms and you know, but it doesn't look like a shortage to me.
So you're right. I've exceeded my knowledge, but I'll ask our non-game supervisor, Zach Walker, to come up and talk about the specifics of the IB, whatever it is, IMBCR program, so that he can share that with you. But you're right. I mean, to summarize all of this, we just have, by prioritizing these species, we can take what limited resources we have, both manpower and fiscal, and address the most pressing needs. And basically that's all this matrix, this process does, is prioritize where can we put our limited resources.
I would make only one comment, and a short explanation would just, in regard to survey grids, would be just interesting to me, but I would make only one comment while it's important to collect data, I hope that just putting them on a tier so that we can get federal funding doesn't leave them there. I'd like Wyoming to be a better example than the federal government is in their ESA program of things actually come off lists once the data proves that there are plenty there. So,
right.
You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Just an effort to get funding to do a study. I would hate to think that once that's just my comment. That's a comment.
And again, I'll have Zach, this is his program, his folks under his guidance will address these species. So yeah, Zach can also touch on the importance of the prioritization as well.
Thank you.
Okay, welcome, Zach. Appreciate it.
Yes, President Price, Commissioner Little. So basically, it's kind of the IMBCR, which is Integrated Bird Monitoring and Conservation Regions work. It's very similar to the Breeding Bird Survey in that you go out, there's basically this, sorry, I did this last time too. I hit the, anyway, there's a series of grids that you place across the state. And so basically what you have somebody do is go out to a randomized subsection of those grids and they perform surveys very similar to the breeding bird survey. They go out and they listen for birds and record what they hear. And that's done during the breeding kind of season to see what might be resident in the state. So some species are missed as part of that, again, because you have different, the way the grids or the cells are randomized throughout the region. So you may be missing a little bit of some species and they might, just not be representative for that species. So it's kind of a balancing act of trying to get enough out there, but have them in enough areas to represent the suite of species in the different areas. So some of that is kind of, when you've mentioned about possibly getting more cells, that would help kind of balancing some of that out. The other thing that I'll point out is we do have, for example, the mountain plover and like the long-bill curlew and some of the other grassland species. We know that they're not being represented by the breeding bird surveys or the IMBCR things. So we have specialized surveys to go out and look for those species. So that's another way we can get about getting information on some of these unknowns is we could set up standardized surveys specifically looking for a suite of species. So that's another option that we have available to us. But a lot of these species, again, just as you said, it was one of those where we were kind of at the verge and we didn't exactly know how to call it. We didn't want to call them NSSUs or unknowns because we did have some information. It just wasn't quite enough. But I do feel that if we get that information and see that they're doing fine, that they should come back off in the next iteration of the action plan.
And so just one little thing, when you're talking about setting up these grids and you mean the department rather than these volunteers.
Correct. A lot of the cells, at least for the IMBCR and the breeding bird survey, so the federal overall nationwide, I should call it, program sets up those routes for the breeding bird survey. And for the IMBCR, we work in conjunction with the Bird Conservancy of the Rockies. It used to be the Rocky Mountain Bird Observatory. And they are kind of analyze all the data for us and do the statistical analysis. So we work with them on that. So.
Right. Thank you very much, Zach.
Zach, I have a kind of a question. You talked about different sources of funding. Do you use funding from the department to fill in these surveys like the curlew and stuff like that to try to just keep those where they're visible?
So like for I guess for the funding for that, it's two kind of different things. A lot of the non-game is funded through the legislature. And we also use money from the state wildlife grants. And then there's a few other little pots of money that we have for grants that come in. However, for example, like the long-bill curlew surveys and the mountain plover surveys, we do have some of the regional folks volunteer and help us out, and then their pay basically comes from the department funds.
Okay, so they're just working on department time and getting that done.
Yes.
I guess I view this thing as basically a way, and you've been stated it, a way to allocate time and money to keep track of these various bird species, mammals and stuff, so that somebody asks the department, what about this? You have at least the best information you could gather.
Yes.
And you've rated them so you can do the best with what resources you do have. Okay, thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Well, we've got the expertise up there at the podium. It's non-related to this, but are there any bird species, invasive bird species, that we're particularly worried about in Wyoming now?
That's President Price, Commissioner Culver. There's not any, I guess, that we're trying to control or anything that I'm aware of. I could be corrected on this, but there are different things that, of course, are a worry. So like we have the starlings, we have collared doves, we have different things that compete with native species. So for example, a lot of our cavity nesters, they have to deal a lot with competition between European starlings and some like the house sparrows and different things like that. So there are kind of invasive species that do cause problems, but they're so well established that it's not that much that we can do with.
And other than those commonly known ones, we don't have any other species that are moving in that we.
Commissioner Culver?
Pratt?
I've been told we have the European dove. I thought they were pigeons when they first showed up. Can you give me a little more information on those? My son said, those are the European doves. They showed up. He says there's no limit on them. You can shoot all you want.
Yeah.
And so I don't know for sure. I haven't tried it yet.
President Price, and you're correct on that. And I assume we're talking about the same thing with the collared dove, the Eurasian collared dove.
Yes.
Yeah, and those are definitely coming in. We're seeing them in more and more areas as time goes by. And basically, you can tell them from the mourning dove, and that they have the collar, the bluish kind of collar around, and they sound nothing like the mourning dove. They have this weird kind of high-pitched nasal call when they're flying, and so yeah, they aren't restricted by the regulation. Basically, I guess as I understand it, you can go out and get as many as you want.
Are they considered invasive species?
They are considered an invasive species, yes.
Okay, so that is one they just showed up here 2 or 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And they're in there with the chickens that are working on the grain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
They taste like chicken too.
Everything tastes like chicken.
Mr. President.
Commissioner Clouda.
Zach, although they're protected, do ravens fit into this?
President Price, Commissioner Clouda, I would probably not be the best person to answer that question. I know we do have different regulations for the blackbirds and different species. I don't know if somebody else would answer that more.
Mr. President, members of the commission, I might just touch on that real briefly based on this discussion. The Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which is an act that's signed with Canada and Mexico and the United States, protects basically all species of birds. Predatory birds, English sparrows and starlings are not protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. Ravens are. Eurasian collared doves, which are classified as an invasive species, they are one of, at the time when we first started seeing Eurasian collared doves about 6 or 7 years ago in Wyoming, they were one of 113 species of invasive birds in the United States that are not covered under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. But ravens are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act.
I'm glad President Price. I'm glad he asked that, because that was going to be my question. I mean, aren't we doing, since there are a lot of studies showing that ravens part of the sage grouse issue, aren't we? I thought there were some control measures being in place, like around garbage areas and things like that, to try to get a handle on them and the destruction.
Mr. President, members of the commission, Commissioner Little, that's correct. And the state of Wyoming through Wildlife Services does have a permit for take of ravens, but that is all permitted through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service under a depredation permit. We have been working with researchers and the Department of Ag, the ADMB, and Wildlife Services for the take of ravens in specific areas, but that still falls under the depredation permit and protection of wildlife under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. That has to be permitted. There just isn't unregulated take of ravens in the state of Wyoming.
Mr. President, Director Talbot, members of the commission, I'll also add to this discussion that recently we have submitted a letter to the director of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service asking them to enter into discussions with us regarding treating ravens basically the way that that crows are treated in Wyoming, where there's a season and there's authorized sport take. We haven't had those discussions yet, but we have asked the service to enter into those discussions with the state.
Thank you. Mr. President, members of the commission, and I guess this is a rabbit trail we might run down, but Zach or Scott could, my understanding is that we're currently seeing a pretty significant die-off of Eurasian colored doves, at least in portions of the state, due to pigeon virus. Any follow-up on that?
Commissioner Price, President Price, Director Talbot, Commissioners. Yeah, there's been an outbreak of pigeon virus in the Eurasian colored doves. Personal experience, I've had 4 that have tested for that. There's no concern for that being transmitted to humans or other wildlife other than domestic pigeons. So if you're seeing them die off in your yard, that's probably what they are. It looks like they just fall asleep and they're in perfect shape.
First I've heard of
Go sit down and try to.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Zach, do you want to take any more questions? You about ready to avoid it? More questions for Zach? Okay, thank you, Zach. Scott, you have some more information.
President Price, Commissioners, we also last time handed out this species list, and Deputy Director Kennedy just gave you a hard copy. And if you turn to page 3, you'll see there in the middle of the page, there's some waterfowl species. And since we last met, we also asked our field managers to critically evaluate those waterfowl species that we typically hunt. And their feeling was for Barrow's goldeneye, canvasback, lesser scaup, northern pintail, and greater sandhill crane. Those 5 species were re-ranked for an NSS 5 based on population trend data that we've received. At this time, we feel like the population is stable to slightly increasing, and those species will be recategorized as a NSS 5, which in effect will remove them from this priority list.
What were they?
This list only includes NSS 1 through 4 and unknowns, NSSU, where we just don't, we have no information really to help us assess it.
Would you repeat, please, those birds that
Sure.
you listed?
So in the middle of page 3, then we have at the top or middle there, Barrow's goldeneye, canvasback, the greater sandhill crane, the lesser scaup, and northern pintail. So those 5 species will come off this priority list. You know, obviously they're still ranked, and they'll be an NSS 5. And I just wanted to update the commission. So when we say, so for our avian species on the list now, we've reduced it from 85 to 80. There's 80 species, 80 avian species on this list now. So with that, I'd entertain any more questions. As way of an update then, pending the outcome of this list, our folks are continuing to work on the swamp plan. And in the November of this year, we will bring you a draft management plan for these sensitive species.
Okay, commissioners, any more questions for Scott? I guess what you're asking is, do you need a motion to proceed on this at this point?
President Price, we need a motion that approves this list of species of greatest conservation need so that we can use this in our statewide action plan.
Okay, commissioners, I'd entertain a motion that Scott.
Mr. President?
Yes.
First of all, thanks Scott and Bob and Glenn for answering all the questions I brought up to you on this. I will make the motion that we approve this list.
Okay, but it's moved. Second.
Second.
Mark, I guess I'll recognize you as second. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion among the commission? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay? Said a nay?
I said it, nay.
Okay. Okay, Commissioner Crank was nay. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Brian Nesbitt.
Good morning, Mr. President, Director Talbot, members of the commission. I'm going to take probably about the next, I would say, 10 minutes here to provide some information at the request of the commission regarding commissioner licenses and their either real or perceived impact on both wildlife management and the biology of mainly deer and elk, and then also on potential sport opportunity impacts of commissioner licenses. So as a little bit of background, this issue was before the commission about 3 years ago, 2011, 2012. The commission heard some of these issues over the period of about 3 different meetings. The commission presented this information, or I'm sorry, the department presented this similar information and then provided some ideas for the commission to consider. And at that time, the commission decided to take no action or to make no changes to the allocation of commissioner licenses. So today, what you'll hear is a quick summary of those issues. We've had some recent letters that all of you have seen that have come from constituents that are concerned about commissioner licenses in particular areas that are in high demand with low quota numbers. And but you won't hear today any kind of recommendations. We'll leave that for the end if after you've heard this information, if you'd like the department to do any further analysis or to develop recommendations for you. So first of all, just as a quick review, all of you are familiar with this because you have the opportunity to make a lot of decisions regarding where your 8 commissioner licenses go each year. But Wyoming statute authorizes the commission, each commissioner, to be able to issue 8 licenses. They have to go to nonprofit charitable organizations, and then those organizations have to have requirements in how they dispose of those licenses, either through an auction or other type of a bid on the license or a raffle, and to members of the public to be used in an area of their choice. The statute and the regulation, Chapter 44, does not require those licenses to be allocated for a specific area until the person who's going to use the license has acquired it and makes a decision on which area they want to hunt. Once they make a decision on the area they want to hunt, that's where the person who holds the license is limited to. As you can see on this slide, most of these licenses are allocated for elk, about 4/5 of them, and then about 1/5 of them to deer. Very, very few to antelope. I think there's only been 2 commissioner antelope licenses over about the last 10 to 15 years. So this is mainly a deer and an elk issue. And just as a matter of refresher from our discussions before, Area 82 down in the south end of the state was the recipient of almost all of the deer commissioner licenses when we talked about this before, and that's one of the things that's changed since then. I'm going to go through basically all of the hunt areas in the state that for deer and elk, and kind of give you a visual of how many licenses are allocated for each of those hunt areas. And I'm going to have to go over here and grab my grasses real quick. And you can see on this table that basically there's only a few deer hunt areas that even receive a regular issuance of commissioner deer licenses. And so you can see there that 82, that's the one that I referred to here just a few seconds ago, down in the south end of the state, used to receive a number of commissioner licenses, but the commission changed that season 3 years ago, so there is no more late season in 82, and so essentially there are no there's no available quota, or there's no available season for commissioner licenses to be allocated against. And then you can see there's a couple other areas there that receive about one commissioner license per year, anywhere from 1 to about 1.5 per year. Elk licenses are a little different story, and that'll be on this on our next chart here. You can see that with elk licenses, there's about 6 different hunt areas where, or I'm sorry, 7 different hunt areas where there are, enough elk licenses to really kind of look at a trend over time. First of all, in Area 7, just right here north of town, areas up in and around the North Fork and the Sunlight Basin, 51, 52, and 55. Many of those seasons in that part of the state have been changed in the last few years because of other issues not related to commissioner licenses, and so the allocation there has gone down significantly, as you can see on this chart. And then again, in the Cody area, areas 56 and 58, if you go to the next slide, you can see a number of licenses allocated there. And those 2 hunt areas we're going to go into a little bit more detail on, because that's where the most of the recent public concern has come from. And then lastly, you can see down in there in area 100 a fair number, I guess an average of about 3 per year commissioner licenses there.
And
Mm-hmm.
So
124 is coming on the last couple of years too, down the
124. Yeah, so gone from an average down in the 1 or 2 per year up to 7 in the last few years. So that's a good point, Commissioner Anselmi. So if you look and you take just this hunt area 56, 56 is along the North Fork, west of Cody. There's a late season there that's a prized license. Not very many licenses allocated through the season setting process to this hunt area. And you can see that in this past year, there was 12 licenses that were allocated to hunt area 56, and the quota there is only 10 licenses. And so 120% of the available quota went to commissioner licenses, and then there were also 2 governor's licenses that ended up harvesting in that hunt area as well. And so more than the number of licenses that were allocated through the normal draw process were used as commissioner licenses or as governor's licenses. And then what you can see down there below, and this is the information that I told you that we would discuss a little bit about. So what does this actually mean as far as demographics of the herd? And essentially, when we've looked at all of these hunt areas across the state where we've had a high allocation of commissioner or governor's licenses, there really is no correlative association between commissioner licenses and a decrease in actual bull to cow ratios. So in other words, the number of bulls in the herd unit is not measurably changed by a high allocation of commissioner licenses. With that said, in these areas where there is very high bull quality, highly sought after licenses, there are certainly reports that the department would not refute that in localized areas, hunters have noticed a decline in the number of the very, very large bulls. So while there may not be a measurable decline in overall bull numbers, the number of large bulls, at least perceived by many of the folks that are familiar with those areas, is that in areas that receive a lot of pressure, those higher quality bull numbers are reduced. The next one we'll take a look at, and this is another Cody hunt area 58, which is essentially Carter Mountain. You can see that Carter Mountain receives now much less attention by governor's licenses, or I'm sorry, by commissioner licenses. At one point in time in 2005, there were 21 commissioner licenses that were issued for hunt area 58, and this past year there were only 3. Again, this, the perception in hunt area 58 is that from folks that use that area a lot and that hunt that area and are familiar with it, is that the bull quality has decreased. The department doesn't have any correlative information that, any kind of data that I can show you that corroborates that. However, I guess we wouldn't refute that either, because that is certainly possible on a localized area in a small portion of a herd unit for high allocations of bull harvest. A lot of the commissioner licenses are outfitted hunts, and so a lot of times those commissioner license harvests are large animals, because they are those folks are guided by people who are very familiar with the area and know how to find those larger age class and larger animals. Again, though, in 58, it's another place where the bull ratios they've definitely gone up and down, just like we'd seen in any other herd unit, but they're not, the up and down movements of bull ratios are not associated with commissioner licenses. So again, just to kind of review what we've talked about here today, this issue was looked at by the department and the commission in 2011 and 12. We believe that this is really most areas where commissioner licenses are allocated. We don't hear a lot of concern from the public. It's mainly those hunt areas where there's a low quota and there's very large, high quality type animals. This is certainly a perception of fairness. So let me just expand on that a little bit. So for the hunter who, we'll take this hunt area 56 as an example, who may draw that license based on the drawing odds only once every 10 years because the quota is very low. From their perception, if there's enough opportunity there to allow 10 or 12 commissioner licenses to go there, then they certainly feel like there must be some opportunity to increase the quota to allow them a better chance of drawing the license. And so definitely a perceived and probably a real fairness issue in a select few areas. There is, I think we have good information to indicate there are not issues with herd genetics at the herd unit level or bull ratios at the herd unit level, but there certainly is a perception. And for those folks who spend a lot of time out recreating in these areas and that pay a lot of attention to these bigger animals, it's easy to understand how they could come to some of those conclusions. And then lastly, I think one of the things that the commission heard last time that's certainly relevant to the discussion and germane is that the value of commissioner licenses is definitely tied to the availability of those licenses to be used in any area across the state. And so one of the issues that I think was of concern last time when we talked to the commission about potential changes was the fact that changes in the allocation of commissioner licenses could place higher values on certain licenses if it was limited. For example, if Commissioner Crank could only issue licenses in Commissioner Crank's district, his Area 7 licenses might be worth more than licenses in Commissioner Culver's district. And so there could be, right now, on the average, commissioner licenses sell across the board for about $9,000 to $12,000. And that's because they can be used basically anywhere the hunter chooses. If that was to change, one of the potential second order of effects of that is that the demand can change and the value in turn can change, which has an impact on the non-governmental organizations, the nonprofits, the charitable organizations that rely on these licenses as a source of revenue. So with that, I do know there's some public comment, Mr. President. I know there's some folks that want to speak to this. I would certainly answer any questions now, or maybe if it's your pleasure, Mr. President, we could take public comment and I could come back up and see if there's any additional questions.
I was just going to say, I have a question on the data, if you wanted.
Go ahead, Commissioner Little.
President Price, Brian. So if I read correctly in the documentation provided to us earlier, the data in reference to the commissioner licenses that you provided assumed that all filled. Or do you actually know they did?
Mr. President, Commissioner Little, we are able to, that's based on harvest data. So there's actually a row on those charts that I gave you that shows out of the commissioner licenses, how much of the harvest was comprised of commissioner licenses. So that's pretty good information. I mean, it's the same harvest information that's used, the same survey that's used for other license holders as well. So you can assume that that is the same level of confidence or the same level of quality of data.
Thank you.
Mr. President, may I?
Yes.
Brian, to correct your stats on that, I was a governor tag holder, and I did hunt Area 56 for 2 days and never saw an elk. So you said both governor tags harvested? No, that's not true.
Okay. I guess my understanding is that 2 governor's tags hunted there.
Okay. But you had said earlier, and I just wanted to correct you.
Okay.
With respect.
Yeah, if I said harvested, I stand corrected.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Commissioner Rael, for clarifying that, because actually in you guys' documentation, you said that as well. You said these are assuming that all filled.
Okay.
And that's okay. So thank you, because that in other words, they may not have, but they did hunt there.
Sure. Governor's licenses.
Right.
I'm going to ask a question, Brian, and maybe you'll choose to answer it after we've had response from the public. I have 2 blue sheets. So let me ask it afterward. Let's go ahead and let these people respond. Excuse me. Commissioner Anselmi.
I was a little naive, or I wasn't aware till this year. If you buy a commissioner's tag, you don't have to, I mean, you eventually have to designate your area, but it's not something you got to do like within a week of buying your license. You could do it. I had some people come down to my neck of the woods and they hunted that. They had a guy go out to 124 and scout. And then when they found the bull, then they went and got their license. So if they wouldn't have found a bull, then they'd go somewhere else. It really was eye-opening to me that somebody'd spend that much time and effort. They were from New Mexico. I mean, they came up here and scouted for a week, and when they found the bull, then they went to Green River and designated they were going to hunt 124. So that was interesting.
Yeah, and Mr. President, Commissioner Anselmi, I actually was made aware yesterday that that's actually occurring a little bit more around the state. There, some of the folks that outfit have observed more of that around the state.
Let's send a scouter out for. They have a lot of resources to send somebody out ahead of time to.
Okay, any more questions from the commission for Brian right now? With that, we have a Jim Mallow has turned in a blue slip. Okay, state your name and.
I'm Jim Mallon, and I represent the BOW.
Okay.
President Price and commissioners and Director Talbot. I'd like to just explain how personally that several commissioners have donated over the years to BOW and how much we appreciate it and how much it means to our organization. And we raffle these off, and 100% of the proceeds go back into Wyoming. We do some standalone projects. We also team with other conservation groups, and Wyoming benefits, Wyoming wildlife and Wyoming resources. And I want to thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions for Jim? Okay, thank you, Jim. The other is Lee Livingston. Take board, please, Lee.
President Price, Commissioners, Director Talbot. For those of you who hadn't had a chance to meet, my name is Lee Livingston. Excuse me. I'm standing in front of you here today as a hunter, not an outfitter. If I was here as an outfitter, I'd say leave it alone. I had 2 in Area 56 last year. I'm not going to beat up on a lot of the points that Brian made. You understand those. The one I would touch a little bit on is the issue of fairness. As the father of hunters and a hunter myself, in Area 56, when you see there's 10 tags and we put in for it, my kids and I put in for this year, we didn't draw, and then you see another 12 that are out there doing it. It kind of comes down to an issue of fairness. I'd sure like to crack it at those tags, or maybe put a few more in there if it's not a biological issue. I want to touch real quick on a point that Commissioner Anselmi brought up, is on what we call mercenary guides. Years ago, I'd buy a commissioner tag for $1,000 to $1,500. As Brian said, they've gone for $9,000 to $10,000. I've seen them sell for $15,000. These guys are putting a lot of time and energy in this. They do not have to commit to the area they want to hunt until right before. As soon as they can apply for a day before they start hunting, if they can get through to the agency. I've watched airplanes scouting areas. I mean, they're targeting the biggest and the best, and there's some guys out there, they're doing it and doing it quite well. I don't know how to cure that other than reduce the number of tags. Statewide, obviously, it's not a big issue, but when you start getting into an area that has a very limited resource or limited number of tags, it starts becoming an issue. Another thing I'd like to touch a little bit on is the fact that the way these seasons were set. In 2011, excuse me, I was shanghaied by then Supervisor Nesbitt. He says I volunteered, but I think I was a little bit fuzzy on that, to be on an elk working group, Cody Elk working group. And we spent over a year, a lot of hours, a lot of time in coming up with some recommendations for seasons in the Cody Elk herd unit. And this Area 56 was a point of contention with a lot of guys in there on what we should do, whether we should have it at all. Based upon the information we got from the Game and Fish and personal observations, we settled on the number of 10 licenses for that area. And then to turn around and watch the number of commissioner licenses in there start ramping up, it's not necessarily a slap in the face, but it's kind of like, what do we do that for then? If we could have 20 tags in there, let's have 20 tags. So, it comes down to the fairness. It comes down to the time and energy that the working group and Game and Fish put into crafting these seasons. I've always been told, if you're not going to be part of the solution, don't be a part of the problem. I don't have all the answers. There's several ideas floating around out there. As with anything, it needs to be looked at as closely as possible, because there's usually some unintended consequences. I believe what we're facing today is unintended consequences of the commissioner licenses. For them to explode into what they are now, I'm not sure that's what the commission thought of when it was first brought forward. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Okay, thank you, Lee. I'm going to ask a question there. Do you have any ideas or suggestions of a way that may work? I think, this is sometimes we don't think of everything. The department doesn't think of everything. And some of the best suggestions come from the people that are actually experienced in that area.
President Price, I do. And these are not all mine. I'd like to take credit for them, or if they don't work, I won't take credit for them. But reduction of license numbers from the commissioners. I know that they go out and they benefit a lot of NGOs, a lot of nonprofit organizations, and there's a lot of money hitting the ground, and a lot of it hits the ground in Wyoming. But I think our concern should be, to our resource first. So yes, possibly reducing the number of licenses. As Brian alluded to earlier, possibly making them restricted to the district that the commissioner comes from. Restrict to a certain percentage And that would be, whatever, 10%, 10%, 30%, no more than can be in that area. I'm not exactly sure how that would play out in the allocation and purchase of these licenses. And I'm not sure if it's an administrative nightmare for the agency. Require an app deadline, and it comes back to Commissioner Anselmi's point he made about people scouting areas and finding the animal and then picking the area they want to. Require that they have a certain time frame within either purchase of the license or before the season opens, one way or the other, that they have to designate their area and their season. And there's a few others floating around out there. I don't have any off the top of my head, but I know that, again, I'm willing to sit down. Several of the folks from around Cody would be willing to sit down and help you hammer out something that might work.
Commissioner Little?
President Price, Lee, thank you for coming and talking. And I'll tell you that when I accepted this position on the commission, I didn't even know what a commissioner's tag was. I had to ask what I was going to do, but I've come to realize how valuable they are in terms of the nonprofit organizations and what those nonprofit organizations are able to do with them. And of course, in order to make a decent amount of money at them, there has to be something special about them. So I understand what you're saying about areas where you've put so much work into being a part of deciding maybe what quote, making a somewhat of a decision in terms of what is an appropriate quota in terms of certain areas. But, another solution to that, which I'm not sure the general public would want, would be to say, okay, so here's an area where we only want to take 10 out of, and it's possible, given the good work that a commissioner's tag can do to nonprofit organizations, maybe we should reduce that to 5, because we might get 5 commissioner tags who want to hunt in that area as well. So that would be another part. And then, I can appreciate what Commissioner Anselmi brought up, but even as an outfitter, I'll bet you're out there scouting for your client right up until the day he hunts that too. So to say that a commissioner's tag would not have, that the people who have purchased that tag, whose money went to that nonprofit organization, wouldn't have the same benefit as someone who either was scouting on their own or going through an outfitter, would seem a little unfair to me too. And I'm just making these as comments and food for thought as well. But thank you.
President Price, Commissioner Little, I don't envy you as a commissioner, any of you, on making a decision on where these go when you alluded to not even knowing what they were, because I understand there's a lot, and my organizations that I've represented have been knocking on your door for those. To address your comment about possibly reducing the number of licenses in an area, I have a feeling that there would be a general uprising with the resident hunter. We in the outfitting industry, we get enough flack for catering to the rich man, it being a rich man's sport. And if the resident hunter sees his opportunity cut so that a commissioner license holder can come in, I have a feeling there might be a general uprising.
I'm just suggesting sometimes changing things brings unwanted consequences.
Mr. President, may I?
Commissioner Rail?
Lee, I represent our district, and 56 is a prestige area to hunt. Prestige. It is. It's one of the best areas in the state. So is 58, and on down the range, clear to Jackson. Cutting licenses? No, I don't think that's the answer for residents. I don't think we want to dip into that 10 allocation license of licenses. Is it fair for the commissioner licenses to pick their area right before the hunting season begins? I don't think so. I don't know if that's the answer. to cut that out. I don't think we want to tell everybody that, or tell the commissioner holders, license holders, that they have to hunt in that district if they bought the District 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it may be. It is a statewide thing, and I think it's taken away the value of that license. I mean, if you drew in say the Cheyenne area, where are you going to hunt? I mean, you're going to hunt the Laramie Peaks, and you're limited. There's a lot of private land up there. It's 90% private, if I understand that right. But so in short, I think that I don't have the answer. Tim and Dusty, they're both my friends too, and they've expressed that. I don't know if that's the answer. I think there's needs to be some more research done on this, because I will say this: the local game warden told me when I was hunting that area, I talked to him on December 2nd. It opened December 1st, and December 2nd I came back and had both my oldest sons with me, and 7 out of the 8 cow elk that they had tagged were still up in the park. So, and we had a fair amount of snow, but it wasn't real cold. And so at that time of year, you basically rely on that Yellowstone migration. Am I right?
You're correct.
Okay. So I don't have the answer, and I'm not so sure the commission has the answer today for sure. But maybe something needs to be done. I like what Commissioner Anselmi. I really that opens up a whole different spectrum on what the commissioner license holders are doing. We don't want to make it a rich man's sport. When I was a kid, golfing was a rich man's sport. Now it's a cheap sport. So those type of licenses become a rich man's sport. But anyways, I know something can be done, and I'm sure with these folks here, we'll find something.
Thank you.
Appreciate that, though.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other comments?
Mr. President,
Yes, Commissioner Anselmi.
I haven't thought this through very far, but if you did make people designate their area, okay, by June 1st, you have to say what area you're going to hunt. But following that through, I think like this 56 is famous. It's been, I'm at Rock Springs. I've heard people saying, yeah, you want a big bull, go up to Cody if you could ever go up there. I never been up there, and I don't, there's a few areas that are just known around the state to where you could, and there's bulls in other places too. Director Talbot's got a few honey holes that he doesn't tell many people about that. But I don't know if that would solve the problem by having people designate. I think if they had to designate by June 1st, you might cut out some of it. This deal about scouting, I was really surprised. Like I said, there was a guy, he's from Florida, and he's got a guy from New Mexico, and that guy came up a week ahead and scouted and found this bull. I've got the picture of it. He sent the guy the picture of the bull and says, is that big enough? And the guy said, yeah. So then he punches his tag and goes out there. I mean, it was really eye-opening to me. I thought, you buy the tag and say, I'm gonna go hunt 56 or 124 or 100 or whatever. But
it almost takes away the fair chase.
Yeah, that part of it. But if they had to designate the tag, they'd probably still choose 56 because you guys are famous. If that migration comes through there, it's a good area. So I don't know the answer.
Mr. President.
Commissioner Crank.
I got to disagree, Commissioner Anselmi. Those tags only have value because you can hunt anywhere in the world. If you buy a governor's tag, you can go hunt where you want to, and you're paying an incredible premium for that. And so you designate it late. I think if you limit when they have to choose where they hunt, you devalue those tags to a point where we really harm the folks that receive those tags. And primarily, it's the outfitters that are out there doing that scouting. I recall years ago reading in FNAS, the Sheep Foundation, where someone paid $500,000 or $450,000 for a desert bighorn sheep tag because they had a world record ram spotted. And he hired 3 outfitters to go look for that sheep and alternative sheeps that he could shoot. Would I do that? That to me is not very fair chase. But I mean, that's what happens. And it's primarily the outfitters who are out finding the biggest elk in the world so that one of their clients can say, I'm going to go hunt in area 122 or 5 or whatever, because they want to kill a trophy animal. But if you start making them pick that early, you devalue those tags horribly. So, I mean, I don't, at least personally, I don't think that's the solution. What I did not hear from Brian was that somehow we're biologically harming our herds in 56 or 128 or whatever. And that's the important function to me. I mean, I understand fairness. I mean, I complained to Scott Talbot and Terry Cleveland every year how I couldn't draw a jackrabbit license in Wyoming. And I, even when I became a commissioner, I think it couldn't have gotten any worse, so it hasn't gotten any better. But we all have that frustration. I mean, I'd love to draw a tag in an area where there's only 10 elk tags and a migratory herd comes through there. And I could, for once in my life, go kill a 400-point bull elk. But I don't hear that there's a biological impact on our wildlife herds, and that's what's important to me. So I think rather than jumping to limiting, early designations or changing the system as we have, we need to carefully think about this and not just jump to easy solutions that would horribly devalue those tags, because those tags do great work for Wyoming wildlife. That's why I think the legislature said that we should get them and be able to dole them out, and why they gave the governor certain tags that he can dole out. I mean, that puts hundreds of thousands of dollars in any given year to work for wildlife. And so I think whatever we do, it's got to be very careful, very thoughtful, and very deliberate.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Crank. I think at this point, Lee, if there's no more questions in the commission, I'll say thank you, and then let Brian come up and, oops, excuse me. Joy's waving her hand there. She brought up a late thing, so.
Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Joy, I got that, and I kind of forgot.
Commission President, members of the Commission, Director Talbot. My name is Joy Bannon. I'm with Wyoming Wildlife Federation. The Federation has received a commission tag this year, and we're very appreciative. We've received them in past years as well. The number, or the money received through when the Federation receives a tag is 100% allocated to Wyoming's wildlife and their habitat through tangible and non-tangible efforts and outcomes. The way the Federation typically offers a tag is through a raffle, which allows Joe and Jill down the street to purchase a tag. So it doesn't become this, you have to be rich to get the tag. We're on another part of just including some points into the conversation here, is that we are confident in the department's ability to collect data and in their ability to determine if a quota is impacting the population of a herd. The attractiveness of these tags for a ticket purchaser or a buyer is that they can choose the animal, the elk, mule deer, or antelope, and they can also choose it anywhere in the state, and that is extremely attractive, as we have been in this process for a long time. And just in closing, we are very satisfied with the current process for the big game commission licenses.
Okay, thank you, Joy. Commissioners, any questions for Joy? Well, Brian, can you untie the knot and tell us how we're going to solve this?
Well, Mr. President, I can tell you that, we're certainly willing to, conduct several analyses of all the different options that have been discussed. We've heard anywhere from Commissioner Crank, leave it alone, to ideas from the public about different ways we could restructure it. We're certainly willing to take a look at that. We did before. We brought a recommendation, and at that time, it certainly wasn't a recommendation that was palatable to the commission. So anyway, we're willing to do whatever the commission desires here. I don't have a recommendation for you right now today. I think there's a lot of options out there regarding how we either address or do not address this issue.
Okay, I guess I'm going to ask on behalf of the commission that you continue to study this. It's I think everybody agrees, a perception problem, not a real on the ground problem. And so we're going to have to be very careful how we look at this. Do you have a comment?
Mr. President.
Were you going to say something?
I'll go after it.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Commissioner
excuse
Culver.
Just a couple of things. First of all, I actually think the concerns brought forth by the public on this have some merit. I'm absolutely wanting to maintain the value of these commission licenses because they do bring in a lot of money for habitat to the state and other purposes. One of my questions, I guess, is, and I need to go back and review this statute 23-1-705, but if you were to place a restriction on the percentage of bull licenses for any given area, or in the case of deer and antelope on the number of total licenses in any given area, does that need to be done statutorily or can it be done through regulation?
Yeah, Commissioner Culver, that is entirely within the purview of the commission.
It is.
The statute gives you authority to allocate those licenses and to set basically sideboards on how you do it.
And one other piece of data I would like to see is what percentage of these licenses are designated for a specific area when they're purchased or when they're won through a raffle, and what percentage of them wait till just before season, just before hunting to designate? I'd like to see that data if it's available.
I think that's probably available. Yeah, Jean's nodding her head. So one thing I think that you just made me think of something, Commissioner Culver, that I don't know if I did a real good job of articulating is that I don't think I'd want to relook at that list, but in general, I will tell you that over time, I don't know that there's any one hunt area for any one species that has maintained extremely high numbers of commissioner licenses over a long period of time. The example of 58, I do know that one was at 21 at one point. Now it's at 3. I know that 56 that's been talked about here a lot today was at 2 or 3 licenses not long ago, and now it's up at 12. And so these, I don't know if it's a supply and demand issue. I don't know if it's a perception of where the quality is best issue, but it does seem over time to not stay static. And the one exception to that was 182 down in Bags, and that opportunity no longer exists because the commission decided that it was no longer necessary to have that season. So,
Mr. President, may I?
Commissioner Claudia.
Okay, just briefly, I appreciate what Lee had to say, and I think I understand that, but I am going to piggyback on what Commissioner Crank says, and I think until the commission is presented with solid scientific evidence that these commissioner licenses are affecting a specific herd unit and or quality of that herd unit, if it's not broke, don't fix it, is at least my thoughts on it, until you can come to us and tell us that our commissioner licenses are affecting that herd unit, whether it's the population or whether it's the quality of the herd or whatever. Does that make sense?
It does.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. And over here, Commissioner
Yes.
Rail.
Commissioners, I couldn't agree more. And that's why I said there's no way we could come up with an answer today. But I'm not so sure that specifying a date of some sort, not June 1, not July 1, but maybe August 1. That gives somebody ample time to go scout, whatever they may do to prep up for their hunt. But in Area 58, there's also a $500 trespass fee now on that ranch. So that could be one of the factors involved. Although you say that they paid an exuberant amount of money for the license. So what's $500? But it means something to some people sometimes. So that number of 21 licenses could have gone down real easily because of the quality of hunt and because of that $500 trespass fee, which wasn't implemented until about 3 years ago. So
I think your point that there are other variables that could be weighing on changes to numbers of licenses in different areas is valid.
But I don't think we should change the number of allocated licenses. And I don't believe, in my opinion, that we should change the specific districts that one has to hunt. I think that would devalue the license in a tremendous way.
Okay, I'm going to break in and remind you that we're working on our lunch hour. Brian, does that mean anything to you?
I am here at the pleasure of the commission.
Did you have something, Scott, that you want to bring up?
Mr. President, members of the commission, I just might add that you can see in the PowerPoint that we reviewed this in 2012. We have reviewed this issue, I think, about every 3 to 5 years during my entire career. And I guess we are where we're at. And if we need to change that, we certainly have that option to do so. I guess I would just remind all the commissioners that license allocation in the state of Wyoming is a very sensitive issue. If you look at issues such as resident preference points, that issue has been brought before the legislature the last 5 sessions in a row and has not been resolved. And when you look at these issues, I just ask the commission to keep in mind, we had 11 licensing bills that were introduced last year to the legislature, and they did not pass. But that's something that the public keeps a very, very close eye on, and I guess I would caution the commission in that regard.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Brian, I think maybe say thank you. And we have Carrie Little is our lead for WAFA. We're going to take just a minute and listen to her report.
You bet. So I guess I do need some clarity, Mr. President. Would you like the department to proceed with developing some recommendations? Would you like us to continue to monitor this and come back to the commission if we feel it's an issue? I need to make sure I've got clear direction from the commission.
I'm going to take it there, and I think my opinion is from what we've heard here, continue to monitor it.
I motion that recommendation, Mr. President.
Okay.
If we're just doing a straw poll, I'm for continuing to monitor.
But I would like to see the data on when they're, okay.
Okay. So let's do it that way. I don't think we need a motion to that effect. So we'll continue to monitor it. If you find something or have some input that's important, bring it to us. We can look at it then. But if we start fiddling here, I'm afraid that we aren't going to do it right here. Okay. Thank you. Carrie, could you take a few minutes?
It is our lunch hour, is that correct? What? It is our lunch hour, correct?
Yep.
Are you, President Price, are you letting me know I should be short and brief?
No, good.
So President Price, my fellow commissioners and public present, it has been my honor to represent the commissioner portion of the leadership at WAFA. And of course, as this is Wyoming's hosting year, Scott and I were able to team together, he, the chairman of the directors, and myself as the commissioners. This was a Commissioner Culver and Commissioner Price also attended, and this was a great year for representation by the commissioners. There were actually 11 Western states represented in the commissioner meeting alone. I know there were a few more states represented in the directors group. Wyoming, Arizona, Nevada, Colorado, New Mexico, Idaho, South Dakota, Montana, Utah, and this year we also had the addition of Oregon and Washington. And we started the day in the commissioners meeting with the two presentations, one on urine-based scents and their potential contribution to CWD, and also some potential legislative changes being considered to the Pittman-Robertson Act to add recruitment as a use for those funds. Then we went into the state presentations, and just a quick highlight from each state. South Dakota had a great pheasant hunting season. They had increase in female hunter interest, uses for the increased PR dollars in their states, and that the aquatic invasive species have been discovered in South Dakota, and they are increasing their monitoring in there. New Mexico, they had a new program to allow taking of mountain lions in foot snares. The transplant of sheep was going well. Discussions over additional department funds due to several years of hiring freezes and the public's lack of understanding in terms of why those funds were there and what their needs were. And then the game wardens have penalty assessments now that we're freeing up the game warden's time. In Arizona, they had plans to harvest one of the bison herds at the Raymond Ranch. These had cattle genes. They're not a pure herd, and they're replacing them with some genetically pure bison from South Dakota. Then there are 7 new monument proposals in the state of Arizona that are of great concern to their commission down there. Most recently, one of them, which is called the Grand Canyon Watershed Monument, it is approximately 1.7 million acres, and they were preparing for litigation if needed in regard to that. Then they had concerns over the Mexican wolf issue and the expansion there. In Washington, they discussed their efforts. They had at one time, and they're considering bringing it back, a youth commission. And it was not only a bit of a perpetuation plan for people being interested in the commission and the making of regulations, but they had died during funding, and so they're trying to bring that back. In Colorado, the greater sage grouse had not been listed, and the Gunnison count was up 24%. The first strategic plan had just been completed with the newly emerged Parks and Wildlife Commission, and the potential licensing authority changes to be pursued. They were thinking of adjusting their fees as well. And then finally, they had implemented a bighorn sheep program with some of the private ranchers. They give landowner tags that their private landowners are able to sell. And so they have a 5-year kind of trial program going on down there in regard to that. Montana grizzly bear delisting was their main concern, and they had also had a great year for sage grouse numbers. Then the increase of shoulder seasons on cow elk was how they were trying to deal with their over objective herds. In Oregon, they recently adopted a long-term strategy for the future, which included marine life in their case as well. And then that commissioner, I think, gave us the biggest laugh for the day when he described one of his commissioner meetings where the entire morning was spent talking about cougar hunting, and there were a variety of people there talking about packs of vicious hounds hunting down cougars, and then followed by the afternoon's discussion over wolves and packs of vicious canines described as majestic creatures. So I thought that was interesting. Idaho, no new word on the lawsuit filed against the individual commissioners and director and governor over lynx trapping. They started an elk collar program in the Frank Church Wilderness, Western Watershed. All they were trying to do was gain additional data, but Western Watershed is against it because they didn't want them to land a helicopter there. And then sockeye deaths in the Columbia River due to warm water temperatures. Nevada is allowing the carrying and use of firearms in archery and muzzle loading season. No scopes. And petition filed against coyote killing contests. Recognition given to Nevada to manage their relic leopard frogs. And then the state's handling of it. Utah, they have one of the 4 genetically pure bison herds in the nation. The bighorn sheep transplants, while they were doing that, they found 1 albino. And the Utah governor has joined Colorado, New Mexico, and Arizona governors to support that the Mexican wolf needs to stay in its historic territory of Mexico. Then Wyoming, Commissioners Culver and Price discussed governor's task force, that we had 13 elk herds over objective, that we were considering a new forensics lab. And also, I believe we'll have a presentation on it tomorrow, but it was also brought up, the neonatal program for deer fawns in western Wyoming range and what that had found. I won't go into that because they'll give a presentation. So in the afternoon, we had two speakers, one on ESA reform and revisions of the Environmental Justice Act. And we even talked about the potential of a speaker for our Cody meeting, because a gentleman named Lowell Bayer has written a book called Inside the Equal Access and Justice Act, which I hear is quite interesting. And then we also talked about disease management and study updates as being another topic that we would like to see at the summer meeting, and that in reference to brucellosis, CWD, and potentially bighorn sheep pneumonia. And the commissioners were supportive of these, and that is what, excuse me, that is what we have provided to the WAFWA group to come to us with in July. Are there any questions?
Commissioners? So I'll say thank you, Carrie. I appreciate it.
Thank you
And
for the opportunity.
We've still
and
got a full hour for dinner.
I hope we see every one of you commissioners in Cody in July at this great experience. Thank you.
With Carrie's presentation, why we'll adjourn the meeting till after dinner or after lunch. We'll reconvene about 1 o'clock. Okay?